Hello, everybody, and happy Europe Day. My name's Scott. I'm from the European Movement UK. I'd like to welcome you to our live stream today, which has been co-organised with the European Movement International and other groups around Europe. Europe Day is held every year, and it celebrates peace and unity across Europe. The date marks the anniversary of the historic Schuman Declaration. In 1950, Robert Schuman, who was then the French foreign minister, set out his idea for a new form of political cooperation in Europe, which would make war between Europe's nations unthinkable. His vision was to create a European institution that would pool and manage coal and steel production, and his proposal started the process of European integration, which led to what is now the European Union. At the European Movement, we wanted to hold an event to mark Europe Day in that same spirit of cooperation. To me personally, that's what being European is all about. People from all over the continent coming together, united in our diversity, to collaborate on projects that are bigger than ourselves. And while here in the UK, we may have unfortunately left the EU, we are still European. And we have a truly international event for you today. And in addition to myself and other speakers from both England and Scotland in the UK, we've also got speakers from Serbia, France, Greece, Bulgaria, Germany, Belgium, Italy, Czechia, and the Republic of Ireland. So we've got a great event lined up for you. These are the approximate times of the event. We've got a few great panels in conversation with and some showcases for you. And in between those, we'll also have loads of speeches from those people I just mentioned briefly. And I'm just going to start the event with a welcoming address from Petros, who's the Secretary General of European Movement International.
Dear friends, a warm welcome to this special event we have put together to mark Europe Day. 7 decades ago, Europeans from across the continent came together to craft a common future for our continent, one based on solidarity, reconciliation, peace, and the pursuit of our common interests. Like every year, we are celebrating this special occasion because we believe that we need to remind ourselves about the values that underpin the European Union. But this year in particular is special because we're not just looking at what happened in the past, but we're also looking into the future. The Conference on the Future of Europe is being launched on Europe Day 2021, and we want to use this opportunity to bring as many people as possible together so we can discuss the direction our union should take in the future. For this reason and for this event, we have gathered stakeholders from across Europe, from across the political spectrum, for discussions, for videos, for other activities that will allow us to bring forward as many voices as possible. We hope you will enjoy today's event, and we look forward to working with you in the weeks, months, and years ahead to find the best solutions to our common challenges and to craft a joint way forward for the European Union and for Europe as a whole. Thank you very much.
Today is the second time in a year now that we don't celebrate Europe Day the way we used to, being together, being excited about our European future. Today, just like a year ago, we still face lockdowns or restrictions. Many Europeans are still at risk of losing their lives because of the virus. But I would like to think of today as also a day of hope. Hope that we see the light of a new day without COVID. So this is why I would like that this Europe Day be celebrated as indeed the day of hope. It is the hope that we as a union and as a community could use our cooperation and solidarity to prevail against this pandemic. It is the hope that Europe will recover economically and prosper. It is the hope that we will continue to live our way of life as we know it. So this year, Europe Day is the day of optimism and promise that we will win this fight and come out of it even stronger. Happy Europe Day.
Thank you very much to Petros and to Eva there. There was the Secretary General and the President of European Movement International. And we'll be hearing a lot more from MEPs and from stakeholders from across Europe throughout this event, which is taking place for the next 3 hours. To start with, I'd like to get straight into our first panel, which is being hosted by European Movement International, and it includes stakeholders of theirs from across the continent. Enjoy.
Dear friends, a warm welcome from the European Movement offices here in Brussels. Today's discussion is dedicated to Europe Day. We are celebrating all the values that the European ideal represent. And to do that, we have invited 4 members of our network representing really important stakeholders doing significant work with constituencies throughout Europe. First, we have Snežka Mihajlović, who is the Secretary General of Europa Nostra, the organization predominantly focused on cultural heritage. Welcome, Snežka. Thank you very much for joining us. With her is Frédéric Vallière. He's the Secretary General of the Council of European Municipalities and Regions, the biggest grouping of local government across Europe, bringing together associations that are closer to citizens at the local and regional level. Hello, Frédéric. Then we have Joe Elborn. He is the Secretary General of the European Youth Forum, the biggest network of youth organizations representing millions of young people throughout Europe. Great to have you with us, Joe. And last but certainly not least, we have Patricia Heidinger. She's the Director for Global Policies and Sustainability at the European Environmental Bureau, the umbrella organizations for the environmental movement, representing NGOs active on a whole host of areas and also representing millions of environmentalists throughout the continent. Thank you all for joining us for this discussion on Europe Day, about Europe Day. And perhaps I can start with you, Snežka. What does exactly Europe Day represent for you? What is the meaning that the day carries for you and your organization?
Now, Europe Day, for me, is the day when we celebrate the European values and ideals. And Europe is so much more than institutions and regulations. It is a feeling. For me, it is also a sense of pride, of being belonging to that formidable European family, a sense of belonging, sense of togetherness, solidarity. It is also, when I speak about also my organization, Europa Nostra, Europe is a formidable culture, a formidable shared cultural heritage, a legacy, something that we have inherited from so many generations before us, and that we have a responsibility to also transmit to future generations. Also, for somebody, European citizens who come from Belgrade, from former Yugoslavia, for me, Europe is the celebration of peace, celebration of hope, in a sense, because I've seen what it means with what happened in former Yugoslavia. What is the terrible price when we do not have Europe? What is the price of a non-action and a non-Europe in my country? So it is also, for me, that's why, as I said, a hope, a huge hope, and also an extremely important responsibility for all of us, the Europeans.
Indeed, that is very true, and I think that's why it's important to mark the day, because of what it represents. Frédéric, if I come to you, as I mentioned at the beginning, you lead an organization that has a presence throughout Europe, not just the European Union, but throughout Europe, working with local and regional governments in a variety of countries. How is the Europe Day marked by your organization and perhaps by local governments throughout the continent?
Well, first of all, the Europe Day is a date of commemoration when a handful of politicians, wise Europeans, decided to say, okay, let's join together to avoid to reproduce the errors of the past. And we know what it meant at the time in 1950. And for us in CMR, we are now celebrating our 70th anniversary. We were created just after the call from Schuman to say, okay, Europe needs to unite, and cities, local governments are the place where we can start this unity, this peace building. And so very soon after, or at the same moment, really, twinning movement started, and cities started to twin with partner cities across borders, and the European Day in many municipalities is a moment when they speak about Europe with the citizens, with the associations, very often with the local chapter of European movement, for example, or the various organizations talking about Europe at local level. And in many cities, there are gatherings, celebrations, small festivals addressing questions of Europe and bringing also the views of their partner cities in Europe. So this is what Europe Day is in for us. And of course, as CMR, we are celebrating in our way the Europe Day by providing interviews, videos that will be launched on Sunday. But to talk about also the reaching out, not only in the European Union, of course, it's very important for us that when we talk about Europe, when we think Europe, we don't think it within only the 27 member states, but we think it with our neighbors, first of all, and with our partners. Europe is not a closed club of the 27th. It's a continent. It's a continent that needs to be alive, and integration can take many different ways, and certainly also with our friends from Britain, for example, who unfortunately have left the club, if we can say so, but they're still in Europe, and we still need, and we will partner, of course, with our British friends in many ways in the future.
Now that's a really important message, exactly because of the reconciliation and unity that Europe Day represents. I think what you just said, it also echoes perhaps Sneska's message of the need to work together in the context of our continent, because yes, Europe is not just an organization or a club, it's also an idea. Patricia, from an environmentalist perspective, perhaps, what does Europe Day represent for you and your organization?
Yeah, for me, Europe Day, well, on Europe Day, we celebrate, first of all, a Europe which is united in peace. And I think today we've become accustomed to living in a peaceful region. And I still remember growing up in a divided Germany. I also feel with Sneska, I remember as a kid following the news on the wars in the Western Balkans and seeing the refugees coming to Germany. I was only a child then, but I understood that that peace that we have accustomed to can always come to an abrupt end, and was can erupt very close to us. And we don't have to look to the past to see all the open and hidden conflicts in and around our region. So for me, Europe Day is first of all a day to remember and not taking peace for granted. But then it's also a day on which we can celebrate what we have achieved together by coming together, whether that's opening up the region for everyone to move, work, and settle freely, opening up our educational institutions and systems, or if it's protecting our environment together. So I think it's a day to remember that we can do much more if we stay united and if we continue to believe in cooperation, and if we continue leadership around our core values, justice and human rights, environmental protection, and sustainability.
Well, indeed, and again, all these big challenges that we need to address, we can only do it if we work together, because we cannot really defend our environment, we cannot defend our way of life without working together. Joe, from a youth organization, especially one that represents such a large number of young people, how do you view Europe Day, and how does it relate to the aspirations of young people?
Well, I can only echo what the others have said. And sort of peace is obviously the headline word here. I come from Northern Ireland, where peace is a pretty a newish thing, so it's got a very personal meaning for me. But as the youth forum, we obviously have a huge constituency. We have all the different political young groups from left to right to middle. We have lots of different minorities. We have lots of different regions which are represented. We last time we checked, about 6,000 grassroots organizations within our umbrella. And so it means a different type of peace for me, because there's very few things which all of our organizations pretty much unanimously agree on, and positively, Europe is one of them. So alongside the need for democracy, the need for a sustainable vision for the future, for me, Europe means a much easier discussion internally.
Yeah, true. And perhaps, all of you have touched a little bit upon the things that are really strike you strongly about the European project and what Europe Day represents. But I want to probe a little bit more, perhaps. We have had now over 7 decades of European integration, one way or the other. We have achieved a lot together. I would like to ask, what is the one aspect of European integration that really resonates the most with you? Perhaps, Joe, since you were speaking last, I'll start with you. What is exactly the thing about European integration that is really important from a youth organization's perspective?
I think it's the draw of Europe and the opportunity really to get even larger. We had the honor of welcoming in the Ukraine Youth Council into the Youth Forum only a few weeks ago during our last General Assembly, and the celebration and passion and excitement to be involved in something like this was absolutely incredible to watch, even if it was unfortunately just via Zoom. So I think that the opportunity to do more, to go further, is really critical and important.
Yeah, that is a very strong message. But Patricia, from your perspective, what is that the achievement of European integration that really resonates with environmentalists?
Well, environmental problems don't stop at borders. Air pollution travels across borders. Polluted rivers cross whole continents. I was in kindergarten when the nuclear catastrophe happened in Chernobyl, but it made it very clear that pollution and contamination can travel very, very far. And most regions at the time were very much affected by the catastrophe. And we have many other problems that are environmental problems that are global in nature, whether that's climate change or plastic pollution. So the fact that the European community back in 1972 decided to jointly develop environmental policies at the time was really innovative and that showed European leadership. It was a major step forward in protecting the environment in our region, and we all benefit from that today with much cleaner rivers and lakes, with high standards for waste management and recycling, best available techniques for our industries and much cleaner air. Also, our consumer rights are protected. The goods that we buy must be free of hazardous chemicals and toxics. We have a large network of protected areas and so much more. So European citizens, all across the EU, have been very supportive of the EU developing strong joint policies to protect nature and to tackle climate change. The Eurobarometer survey regularly shows that more than 90% of Europeans support robust environmental policies coming from the European level. So I do believe that protecting our joint environment is really one of the greatest achievements of the European Union.
Indeed. That is very true. And of course, that's something that it's a tangible result that people can really relate to and engage with and work towards. Frederic, again, for you, European integration, you're also a Frenchman, who has obviously been at the heart of the European project. What is the thing about integration that resonates the most with the local governments, local authorities?
Well, I think there are many processes, many progresses that have been made along these 70 years that sometimes we forget, and we tend to think it's completely normal. But I would name one of them is the freedom of movement. I'm old enough to remember that when I was a student, for example, we didn't have Erasmus. Our diplomas were national, so they were not recognized in other countries. So if you wanted to go work, and we didn't even really have yet the freedom of work in another country in Europe. It came a little bit later. But even so, we could travel, but then our diplomas were not fully recognized in a neighboring country. So all these progresses, you know, we have them now, and we cherish them, but we tend also to forget that this was achieved in the past years. And for cities and local governments, one of the main achievement is that local governments, local and regional governments, are considered and integrated in the European governance system. So we have a chamber, which is the Committee of the Region in the European Union, and we have the Congress of Local and Regional Governments in the Council of Europe in Strasbourg. And those two institutions are there to see and watch if the regulations taken by the European Union and by the Council of Europe are safeguarding the rights of the local and regional governments. And in particular for the Congress, it's very important in Strasbourg because we have succeeded in having a European Charter of Local Self-Government, which is an official document, so a piece of law, and the Congress, who is composed of representatives of local and regional governments, monitors the implementation of the Charter and makes sure that the law is followed by national states, for example. So this helped a lot also to mainstream the local policies and support public policies that are not similar, but respecting the rights of the citizens all across Europe.
That is indeed quite important, and I think it's something that is worth pointing out. And taking for granted some of those things that have become a common practice is indeed part of the human nature, but we can easily lose them unless we defend them. And the pandemic reminded us how important the freedom of movement is, you know, in every possible way, from the smallest things to the biggest. And indeed, we should never allow that to happen. Saskia, from your perspective, what does European integration really represent? And, you know, from a cultural heritage point of view, what is the achievement that really resonates with you?
Now, Petros, in the last 70 years, there have been so many developments, and we can applaud the achievements in so many fields. I mean, it started as a coal and steel community and then became an economic community, developed an internal market, but then it developed policies and made an impact, such an important impact in so many fields, from the regional policy, cohesion policy, environmental policy, research policy, education, etc., etc. But I'm sure that you would expect from me today, when we are celebrating the 71st anniversary of the Schuman Declaration, to say that we also have something that we need to do more. And that is clearly to recognize that the entire European project would have never developed in the way it has developed if we would not have had a sort of centuries of exchanges, cultural exchanges, which is the fundament of the entire European project. And this is still not sufficiently recognized, that our culture, our cultural heritage is at the very heart of what Europe is about. And that is something that we, somehow we are so excited, we are so hopeful that this year, on the 9th of May, is the start of the Conference on the Future of Europe. And we would like to see that we seize that momentum, that really and visibly and loudly also can say that European Union is also a cultural union, that it is the Europe of culture which inspires so many other policies. And this morning I was so excited, in fact not this morning, but at the opening of the State of the European Union conference that was organized 2 days ago by the Florence European University Institute in Florence. The president of the European Union was calling for nothing less than a new European renaissance. And that's exactly the level of expectation that Europa Nostra, so many European cultural organizations are having towards this conference on the future of Europe, also towards the initiative, the new European Bauhaus. We need all together to say at the moment where so many values are threatened, I mean, our health is threatened by the pandemic, our planet is threatened by climate change, but our sort of the essence of Europe is threatened by the threats to the values, the rule of law and democracy, which is perhaps an existential, the biggest existential threat to the European Union, which we are facing today. And so all these threats, we need to join all the forces. And for that, we also need the creativity, the power of our culture, which is going to inspire us to go through all these transformations, because no green transformation, no digital transformation, all these transformations are possible without culture. We need to somehow also change our way of life and again, bring all these values at the heart of what we are about and what we what Europe is about, what our policies are about. So I really think that this is a chance for our generation, as we are coming out of the pandemic and this incredible crisis, but it's a chance for our generation to build back better, that's the slogan, but to have as big ambition as Ursula von der Leyen was saying. We need a new European renaissance, and how to do it without our culture, without cultural heritage. And we need, perhaps we have Frédéric with us, we need a new European enlightenment, un siècle de lumière. Why not? 21st century as Europe, siècle de lumière. Voilà, that is the state of mind and heart that I am on the 9th of May, 2021.
You do, and you have also dressed appropriately also with the colors of the European flag. I didn't miss that.
Symbols are important, very much important.
But,
yeah.
I would like to react to what Saskia just said, because I think it's important to insist on the fact that Europe is not only regulations. Europe is, first of all, the Europeans, the people, the citizens. And culture brings that to Europe, because if we don't know each other, if we don't share some culture together, we will never be able to build a political and a moment of common understanding. And maybe in the last years, and that's probably something we need to correct, and I hope that the Conference on the Future of Europe will address these questions as well. We have been very much focusing on regulations, and it's important to have regulations, of course. We need to tackle climate change. We need to think about health security, about defense, etc., and this will be addressed. But what is mostly important is, how do we want to live together? What do we want to invent together? And this is mostly culture that can bring that. And so we need a strong cultural policy in Europe to share movies, to understand heritage links, etc., etc.
Thanks, Frédéric. And the role of cities and regions is key also, because that's where it happens. And of course, also in countryside, in villages, but we very much look forward to a strong alliance with you and other organizations to achieve that.
Sure.
Perhaps, Patricia, on this note, because the Conference on the Future of Europe is a unique opportunity to engage into this intense debate among all of us here in Europe about the direction we want the European Union to take. And I think Saskia and Frédéric have kind of crafted a vision there. What do you think should the focus be for the conference? What should be the EU doing going forward to make sure that we are still here and we're still relevant in the next 70 years?
Well, I think regarding the conference on the future of Europe, I think what will be important is to really see together how we can kind of together find solutions and kind of marry our kind of overcoming our environmental and our social challenges. So really kind of marrying environmental and social justice. I mean, looking at it from an environmental perspective, again, I mean, we have achieved a lot together in protecting our environment. If we think back to where we were in the early 70s with rivers so polluted, there was literally no life in them. But at the same time, I mean, we have achieved so much together, but the challenges have become even bigger with the triple environmental crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution that has reached every corner of the planet. So we have seen a major paradigm shift in the EU in terms of political priorities when we saw environmental and climate policies moving really from the margins to the core of European policymaking around the European Green Deal. And we now have all that momentum to really turn things around and to put in place transformative policies rather than just trying to find isolated solutions here and there. So I think that's really the potential. And there are things where the EU needs to do more. I think we have finally shown again global leadership with declaring the target to reach climate neutrality. I think we have to step ambition up even more to reach climate neutrality by 2040, which science and experts tell us is possible. And the world needs European leadership. We have seen all these countries following us and defining similar targets. So we need a leader. And I'm very happy to see that the EU has again taken up that leadership role. The same is true for other targets that we need to set. We still need to achieve a zero pollution environment. Again, the EU has taken up a leadership role with strong standards for industry, for chemical pollution, but still a lot of Europeans suffer, for instance, from air pollution. So again, we need to step up our ambition. The same is true for our food system, where we still depend too much on other parts of the world. And for achieving a circular economy, which again is an idea that the EU has really put on the global agenda, and where we need to maintain our leadership, for instance, by defining clear and binding targets, how we can reduce material use and to show to other parts of the world that an economy can be successful while coming closer and closer to circularity. So I think that now we are at the stage where we have kind of started entering a very compelling narrative around the European Green Deal, around the concept of an economy that works for all, a well-being economy that respects, on the one hand, human well-being and at the same time the planet's ecological limits. And I believe that with the conference on the future of Europe and that compelling new narratives, we can also bring on board many more European citizens to join us in that path.
Very true indeed, and what greater platform for, I think, young people to also engage, because to make sure that the EU is indeed successful and survives for the next 7 decades, we will need the energy of young people, because they're going to be the ones carrying the EU forward. So, Joe, from the Youth Forum perspective and the conversations you are having internally, how do you view the Conference on the Future of Europe, and what are your ambitions for the EU in the future?
So we've had 20 hours of workshops in the last 2 weeks on the Conference on the Future of Europe. So that's a bigger question than I could answer in even 45 minutes. I guess there are two things I'll probably pull out of those conversations. Number one is civic space, right? So the Conference on the Future of Europe, great, big exercise involving lots of people. But why is it every 10, 15 years? Why is this not the normal? Why is this participation, this civic engagement not the de facto standard of Europe? Why is it only these kind of extraordinary moments? And we obviously have opportunity here. So we have opportunity with new digital tools and digital democracy and digital engagement to really recast the citizens' relationship with these large meta institutions such as Europe. So that would be a bit my challenge to the structure of the conference itself. In terms of what we're really after as the Youth Forum, our priority is to avoid a lost generation. So we had the financial crisis of 2008, 2009, which threw a lot of issues at youth disproportionately. We've now got a pandemic, which again disproportionately is impacting youth. and that's creating a trust divide, right? And what we want to see coming out of the conference is a real focus on creating a great transition to employment for young people. So all those people who've been hit by the economic crisis, hit by the pandemic, hit by austerity and all these other things, we need to see a really strong commitment to creating spaces where they can flourish and grow for the next 30, 40, 50 years into the new leaders, into the new standard bearers for society. And that's not by doing unpaid internships. That's not by doing gig economy, low value, high insecurity jobs. That's by being very muscular and really investing in this space to create quality, long-term training and employment opportunities for youth across Europe.
Indeed, because I think, as it has been said already, we need to also see how we transform our society to make sure that it's fit for purpose in the future, not just the European Union as an institution. And perhaps for the time we have, I just want to finish our conversation with a question about that, the need to transform and maybe even change the European project as a whole. Do you think that the crisis we just went through, which was indeed a very important, significant and terrifying one, has that opened up the possibility for a different kind of relationship between European nations, but also relationship between European citizens and the EU itself? Perhaps, Snežka, I'll start with you. How do you think that the last 12 months have affected a little bit the way we're looking at the short, medium, and long-term future?
It has, of course, affected us tremendously, and we realized precisely what Frédéric was also saying, that there were so many things that we were taking for granted, and suddenly realized that it can, in 1 month, all those freedoms, all those possibilities can be just, we can lose them. Fortunately, we're losing them temporarily. But I would like to hope that precisely because of the tremendous impact that crisis had on us, that it has also prompted all of us to rethink the way we live, to rethink a series of policies that we have developed from the local level to the European and international level, and to realize that on many fronts we were going in a wrong direction. We were not living a sustainable life. We were going in a sense in a sort of a collective suicide. So I would really hope that's why that if this crisis is going to be a wake-up call to not just to Europe but globally, that we have to put these requirements of sustainable living in better harmony with nature, and also embracing the important values that are at the basis of our society in order to improve the quality of our life, but not just as individuals, the quality of our societies, the communities, the way we live together. So it's all about our togetherness and about solidarity, about inclusion. So it really is an opportunity that we show that, again, Europe can be the force for transformative action, a force for good. It has been 70 years ago, after the awful crisis that we have all been going on, the Second World War. It must be that in this crisis, also Europe will be that transformative power, together with other important players in the world, and with full engagement of us, the citizens, because it's not there somewhere in Brussels, some institutions who are responsible. It's too important to leave it just to the institutions and to leaders of the institutions. My organization is called Europa Nostra, Our Europe. That means that we have a shared responsibility to take care of Europe and as European to be responsible global citizens. So that's why I'm really hopeful. On one side, I'm worried because there are so many attacks on our values and the rule of law and the democracy. I'm very worried about that, but very hopeful that that wake-up call is going to be a forceful one. And this conference of the future of Europe, which is starting now, is giving us a wonderful opportunity to lift up the ambition to join all our voices and forces in a sort of in a holistic way, and indeed to make the 21st century a century where a century of enlightenment and a new European, but not just European, because we have to be a very responsibly global citizen. And to say that we want to do as Europa Nostra something concrete, I just want to tell you that for the 9th of May 2021 and for the start of the Conference of the Future of Europe, we are launching a challenge to our members, but to anybody, to organize debates about the future of Europe in cultural heritage sites, where somehow the spirit of Europe lives, and our memory, our culture. Let us use these formidable places, and in every single village, in every single city, you have these sites, and bring people, however small groups. It can be 10 people, it can be 100 people, depending on the possibilities, but let's use all these places to inspire and engage true debate on the future of Europe, which is inspired by our future, but not looking back, but looking towards that better, more peaceful, fairer, and more inclusive, and definitely more sustainable future for Europe and the entire planet.
Yes, indeed. And like you said, a lot of the sites are indeed at the local level, and the local governments have a really important role to play. Frederic, the last 12 months wake-up call indeed, not least because it put on the front line the services that we need the most, that were often offered by local governments. What do you think changed in those 12 months, and how will that affect the future of Europe?
Well, many things have changed, and I think this crisis has shown also, and we have to look at them seriously, the weaknesses of Europe, and also the weaknesses of our collective feeling towards the European integration. Remember, 12 years ago, there was no coordination at European level. Every state was taking their own decisions. It was a huge mess, and it showed that we were not prepared. And contrary, maybe to what we could have imagined, Europe was not prepared to be confronted to such a health or pandemic or health crisis. Well, things have been more or less adapted, but we also saw the problem with the vaccines and the contracts with the pharmaceutical industry. We have seen the difficulties to have a common position on opening or closing the borders. We have seen the difficult situation of economic actors and the time we spent in deciding to have a common resilience fund and recovery fund. So all this has to help us understand how we can do better in the future, of course, and the Conference on the Future of Europe is a timely moment for everyone, for the citizens, to take the floor and to express which Europe they want in the future. What can we do better? And maybe sometimes also what can we change in the way we deliver the services? And you're right to say that one thing that we have learned as local governments is how important public services are. For many years, we have heard that discourse also here in Brussels about the necessity to privatize everything and to open the market and blah, blah, blah. And suddenly we realized that public services are the services that hold the society together, and in particular, local public services and health services. So these are lessons to be taken into account. But one thing that is also very important, and it's difficult to talk after Saskia because she's so good in expressing all this. But I think it has also changed our perception of what we are as human beings. After all, we are very fragile, and we need to think our place in this planet in a different way. We have said that for many years. I mean, I've been following the climate negotiations for the last 20 years. I've been going in many conferences saying we need to change, we need to adapt, we need to do a transition. But this crisis suddenly brings everything together, and it's obvious that we cannot continue, or we cannot go back to what we were doing before. So yes, we have to change, and Europe can have a message to the world, and this message is important. And now we have an ally, I think, with Joe Biden in the US, and when you know the latest news saying that Joe Biden agrees to open the vaccines to everyone. It's also a lesson to Europe. I mean, the European Parliament refused it a few days ago. So, what are we Europeans if we don't allow Indians to have access to the vaccines, for example, and this example is also a shame in our face as well. And we're not all perfect in Europe. I mean, 11 months ago, Europeans were saying, "Oh yes, we will, of course, share the vaccines with the rest of the world." And what happened? The Africans and countries from the south, they're still waiting for the promises that we made only a few months ago. So all this has to be seen with no over-criticism, but with lucidity to make our union more efficient, closer to the citizens, more inclusive, more aware of what equality means, and in this way, we will be able to renew Europe and maybe make the new renaissance that Saskia and Ursula von der Leyen are calling for.
And I think that's a very powerful message, Frederic. You know, the way that it has forced us to look at ourselves and decide who we are and what we want individually, but also as a community of nations. And I think that realization of the things that are really important has really run through across our continent, and it hopefully will be the beginning of this new kind of Europe that we're discussing. But Teresa, I think it's interesting to follow up from what Frederic said, because obviously the role of the environment, the environmental crisis we have has played in the emergence of the pandemic is quite strong, and it has made a lot of us realize that this is not a unique and isolated incident. If we don't take care of our environment, things like this will happen again. So how do you think is the pandemic influencing our way of thinking in that regard?
Yeah, you're for sure right that the pandemic has shed light on the way we've been treating our planet, and it has, helped us to get more attention for environmental questions. And it's true that we have seen a lot of positive change happening, whether that's at a very local level or at a global level. Starting from things like living in one of the most car-infested cities in Europe, suddenly seeing families moving around of bikes and seeing a whole city transform in 1 year's time, shifting basically a transport system. Two examples like finally seeing better wages offered to care workers in Germany, where we had a system really built on the exploitation of mostly a female workforce from other parts of the EU, all the way to the example that Frederic has mentioned with the waiver on COVID vaccine patents. So I do think that we have understood the role of solidarity. We have started questioning our lifestyle much more. We have started to give much more attention to the way we've been treating nature and its resources. And I think on the positive side, what we have seen at the level of the EU is also that the European Green Deal and its objectives, I think, were really under threat, by the health crisis. But actually, it has survived and it has become even stronger. And its vision for a better future is very much alive. So I think that's on the positive side. I do think the glass is somewhat half full, and I think it's too early to predict how much we have learned from this crisis. One thing that we will have to deal with for a decade at least is the fact that the inequalities that have existed within Europe, but also globally, have become more extreme. I just saw a figure the other day that the 10 most richest people in the world have grown their wealth over the pandemic by around $540 billion, which is more than necessary to pay a vaccine for every single human being on the planet. So the question is really how much have we learned, and are we bouncing back to the old normality, or are we really rethinking the way we live together? Are we really rethinking our economic system? How much are we investing in health services and public services? I think that's something that we still that we'll have to see. And I do agree with Frédéric that European leadership is so important. We need to show that we have been learning from this crisis and that we are ahead of the curve in transforming our societies and our economies, that we're living solidarity with the rest of the world, and that we are also living up to our responsibility to stop living on the expense and on the resources of people and nature in other parts of the world. I think we've become much more aware of that reality, that as the EU, we're the most resource-dependent region in the world, and that there is a new understanding that we have to become self-sufficient for our good and for the good of the rest of the world.
Indeed. I think that's something that all of you seem to echo in our conversation today, the need to really transform ourselves in many ways. And Joe, I'll come to you and you'll have the final word as well. The last 12 months have been particularly hard on young people, because either those that were in education, those who were coming out of education early in their career, it has really affected them considerably. So from the point of view of your constituency, what have the last 12 months taught us, and how can we make sure that those lessons, like Patricia said, are really learned, and then the changes that are necessary are applied to have a better future for young people, but also for the world at large?
As was just said, it's a bit too early to tell, right? Young people went from being frontline heroes to being demonized for breaking rules to being heroes again. It's very difficult to kind of see where the consistency is there. I think in terms of the last 12 months, there's a lot of sort of positivity in the sense that, democratic institutions seem to work pretty well. Like, we've managed to put our whole society on pause for 2 years, which is staggering. We developed in an insanely short period of time a really, really, really complicated vaccination, which we've now deployed to a good proportion of the world. So there's lots of positivity there. I think there's also great danger, right? So if you look at traumas historically, societal traumas, you normally see backsliding and populism and strongmen coming out of them rather than any kind of new enlightenment. So there's a lot of danger, I think, in what happens in the next 3 to 5 to 10 years. What I do know is that there is a deep need for a profound and positive new narrative around democracy, right? We need to change that interface, and young people need to be brought much more into the system. Youth participation is horribly low. We're not engaging and getting young people excited in the right ways through the right medium to engage in lots of processes. And I think that there is an opportunity there that we can do something, but that's going to need a massive amount of investment, a massive amount of thinking. And I hope that Europe's up to the challenge. And certainly with the Youth Forum, we'll be there calling to have that step change and to see if there is the possibility of a brand new Europe.
That's a great message to end with. All that's left for me to do is to thank you all for participating and sharing such an inspiring and dynamic perspective on Europe Day and the European ideals we all serve. And of course, to wish you all happy Europe Day and to say that I look forward to continue working together within the European movement and across the European Union and beyond to make sure that this new world that we all aspire for becomes a reality.
Happy Europe Day. My name is Daniel Freund. I'm a German member of the European Parliament, and I have been a fan of European integration pretty much all my life. I actually grew up on the border between Germany, the Netherlands and Belgium near the city of Aachen. I had the pleasure of going to a kindergarten in Belgium, then to school in Germany, later in France, and went on an Erasmus exchange where I met my Italian wife. So obviously Europe has shaped my life, so that's why I like Europe Day so much.
Thank you very much to Daniel there. That was Daniel Freund, Green Party MEP from Germany. Thank you also to Petros, Frederic, Sneska, Joe and Patricia for their insightful words in the panel just now. We had lots of comments coming in on Facebook from people who are watching and supportive of everything you were saying. And so, yeah, if you're watching on Facebook, you can comment in the comment section below, and we'll display some of our favorite messages on screen during the event. Now, a lot of topics were discussed in that panel just now. One of them was about youth engagement, and we've got a panel on youth engagement coming up a little bit later from the European Movement UK. Another topic that was discussed a lot during the panel just now was about environmental concerns. And then to expand on those topics now, I'd like to introduce to you Molly Scott Cato, who's a former Green Party MEP for the southwest of England, and she's now on the European Movement Executive. Molly, over to you.
Thank you so much, Scott. And it was nice to follow Daniel. I was slightly nervous that he was going to say exactly what I'm going to say, so it was very nice that he actually just told you his personal connections with Europe. And let me say as well, Happy Europe Day. Very nice to be celebrating Europe Day, although of course in sad circumstances for those of us who wished we were still in the European Union. So I'm just going to talk about 3 areas where it seems really important to me that we continue to cooperate across Europe, because there are issues where we can, by working together, really improve people's lives and address serious crises that we're facing. So the first one, you won't be surprised to hear, is climate change. And the thing is, we know that the European Green Deal is a big investment to make a difference, to really fund that transition towards a sustainable economy and a sustainable society in Europe. And it's of the sort of size commensurate with the size of the crisis. Whereas we know very clearly that in Britain, we have a really ridiculously small amount of investment going towards the climate transition. So Europe and the US, I mean, the US is investing on an absolutely incredible scale. But Europe is also, putting forward strong investment, and at the same time, the UK is just left really sadly behind. And of course, a lot of the innovations we need to make are not innovations, economic or technical innovations. They're actually social innovations. So an example of that might be the amazing investments there's been in the night train network across Europe. Obviously, as a Green MEP, I never flew, and so very much appreciated when there was a night train and I could have a decent night's sleep and wake up in my destination. And there's, in countries where Greens are in government across Europe, there's now cooperation between European countries to make sure that you can travel, use the train as your hotel effectively, and it's quite glamorous in its own sort of quiet way, I would say. And another really important example that I hope we will be able to continue with, even though we're no longer in the European Union, is the issue of interconnectors. And I think this is a technical example, but it's quite an interesting example of how it just doesn't make sense for us not to be in the EU, because if you think of a storm or a wind pattern anyway moving across Europe, it's going to start at Ireland and then it's going to move into the United Kingdom, and then it's going to move across Europe. And obviously we need to be maximizing the amount of energy we get from the wind. And as the wind is being generated in Ireland, it needs to be sent to the UK and to France through a system of interconnectors. And that the kind of plans for making those happen are underway. But it's so important that we carry on with those sort of plans. It simply makes no sense. This stuff about global Britain is just like it's a theory. It's from somebody who's never actually engaged in moving goods across the world, or indeed sharing energy across Europe. So we're going to have to continue to cooperate because of where we are. Geography will not change. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is peace. And for me, the thing I value most about the European project is the fact that it's kept the peace in Europe. And that's why it was set up. And that's what the founding fathers had in mind. And it's why people of my generation have not had to fight a war in Europe. But it's also lots of little niggles and little difficulties that have really been smoothed over by our membership of the European Union. And one of those, of course, isn't a little niggle or a little difficulty at all. It's Northern Ireland and the situation between the countries, you know, within anyway, let's say within the islands that I live in, which has been a very difficult relationship over centuries. And it was remarkably pacified by our joint membership of the European Union. Of course, Ireland and the UK joined at the same time, and the peace process was brokered by the British and Irish governments, but with very strong support from the EU. And we've immediately seen now how leaving the European Union has challenged and undermined that process and started to bring back those tensions and borders, which didn't make sense when we were all in Europe together. And now it's horrible, actually, for somebody of my generation who remembers the Troubles very well, to see how that tension immediately has returned. And another example we've seen more recently is with Jersey and the fishermen. And, you know, the conflict over fisheries has a huge potential to turn into violent conflict. I mean, I think the decision to send gunboats was just an absurdity, a posturing absurdity. But nonetheless, you know, we've seen conflict over fisheries before. And now that we don't have good fisheries agreements, we're already seeing that coming back. And there are many other issues that I can see where conflicts will be exacerbated as a result of Brexit. So we need to continue to work together. Now we've got the TCA passed, we've got those structures and committees in place. We need to make sure we use those to build the structures and the agreements that will keep us, not just keep peace, but keep us building closer and stronger relationships rather than allowing conflicts to come back. And the last one was again touched on in the previous session, which is about democracy and the undermining of democracy. So in the UK, it isn't an accident that the Brexit referendum was won as a result of data theft and lies and law breaking. And the people who did that are now the government in this country, and they're proceeding to dismantle democracy. So today we have these reports about, well, the bill actually in the Queen's speech about the fact that you'll need to produce identification in order to vote. It's clearly a voter suppression move like the ones we've seen from the Republicans in the US. We don't have a lot of voter fraud. In fact, it's a tiny problem, but it's, you know, but the sort of people who vote for the Conservative Party are more likely to have those identity documents, and so it's suppressing vote for the other parties and enabling the Conservatives to hold power. And we've seen also moves to put policemen in at the BBC and in at the Electoral Commission and at the Ofcom that governs our broadcasting network. So, you know, we're seeing attacks on democracy in the UK in a big way at the moment. And the European Union, and I'm proud to say that Greens have led on this, have been really strong in defending the rule of law and democratic standards. And we're going to need that support. And we have the Council of Europe, of course, which we're still members of, and the ECHR, and we're going to need those legal frameworks as democracy comes under attack. And I think we're going to be needing to take legal cases to protect democracy in the UK, because we see the undermining of democracy in countries like Hungary, but we also see that British Conservatives are actually working closely with Hungary and trying to find how, from Orban and his party, how he's managed to stay in power there in a way that's actually anti-democratic. So that's something where we're going to need to continue to cooperate. And I appreciate the work being done to defend the rule of law and to hold those countries to account, but we're going to need some support along similar lines in the UK, I think. So, sorry if that was a little bit gloomy, but I hope my message is positive, which is to say, on this Europe Day, we still feel European. I mean, I was certainly using the hashtag #LoveEU, and I will continue to do that. And I know we've all still got friends in the European Union, and they want to keep close relationships with us. And I'm glad to be working with the European movement, because I strongly believe that it's the movement that will. It's a journey, but eventually we will be rejoining the European Union, and it will be a proud day for me when that happens. Thanks, Scott, for organising this. Thanks all for being here, and happy Europe Day.
Thank you, Molly, for those words, and thank you for everything that you're doing, both for the movement when you were in Brussels and also when you were since you joined the European Movement Executive. I'm going to move on now to a panel in conversation with Andrew Adonis and Howard Goodall, who's an award-winning composer that many of you may know his work. He composed music for The Vicar of Dibley, Blackadder, Mr. Bean. Before that, we're going to hear from Saskia Bricmont, MEP from Belgium.
Bonjour, je suis Saskia Bricmont, députée européenne belge. Et ce 9 mai, nous célébrons la journée de l'Europe. Cette journée de l'Europe, c'est une journée qui est axée sur la solidarité, sur le partage de valeurs et aussi d'une approche démocratique européenne. Alors, récemment, nous avons malheureusement acté le Brexit. Évidemment, nous aurions souhaité rester unis avec le Royaume-Uni. Malheureusement, les politiques locales en ont décidé autrement. Et donc, nous avons voté un texte pour essayer de limiter au maximum les problèmes liés au départ du Royaume-Uni et surtout essayer de maintenir les liens et la coopération parce que nous savons au Royaume-Uni que beaucoup de secteurs, beaucoup de citoyens restent favorables à une adhésion à l'Union européenne et nous avons toujours dit aussi au niveau du groupe des Verts européens que nous laissions la lumière allumée pour tout retour possible dans le futur du Royaume-Uni au sein de l'Union européenne. Pour le meilleur, étant donné que ce sont les relations commerciales qui sont au premier plan et qui vont être impactées par le Brexit et qui le sont d'ailleurs déjà, mais ce sont aussi les relations culturelles, les relations touristiques et pour les étudiants, un point très important me semble-t-il, c'est que l'accès aux études via le programme Erasmus était facilité dans le cadre de notre union commune et que désormais ce sera beaucoup plus difficile pour des étudiants européens mais aussi des étudiants britanniques de faire ces échanges entre pays. Nous le regrettons, mais ça ne signifie pas que nous baissons les bras puisque nous continuons à travailler de manière étroite avec tous nos interlocuteurs et tous nos partenaires britanniques, que c'est dans l'optique d'une nouvelle adhésion de la Grande-Bretagne, un jour où le soleil sera de retour et où, très certainement, nous aurons affaire à d'autres politiques au Royaume-Uni. Nous pourrons réenvisager des étroites collaborations, voire une nouvelle adhésion du Royaume-Uni à l'Union européenne. Bonne journée de l'Europe.
Happy Europe Day, everyone. It's really great to be with you in the company of Howard Goodall, one of Britain's foremost composers who's done loads of musicals, lots of choral music. He is, in many ways, can I dare say this, one of England's gifts to Europe because his music is not only cosmopolitan, but he himself conducts it and takes it across Europe. And he spends part of the year, at least did before the pandemic, in France, which then wasn't a crime and we hope won't continue to be so in future. Don't we, Howard? So welcome to Europe Day and to this great podcast. And I want to start by asking you how you see English music and English culture in Europe, because one of the things I'm struck by as I look at this great divorce that's taking place at the moment and how we put it back together again, is that you really can't consider English culture apart from Europe. We're in 2021. 2 centuries ago, Beethoven was writing the Ode to Joy and his Ninth Symphony as a commission by the Philharmonic Society of London. And that great English composer, Edward Elgar, wrote a lot of his music inspired by the Germans. And so the story goes on. Do you want to give us your reflections on England and Europe as a joint cultural enterprise, as well as a political enterprise?
Yes, it's if you come from the musical perspective, it's more or less indivisible. You know, people who were in favor of Brexit often say, oh, we could carry on being connected musically as much as we like. Well, it turns out that music is done by human beings. And it's very, very difficult now for us to do what we did before, which was to move easily musically between the two zones. Now, if you look, as you quite rightly said, we've always been embedded in the mainstream of European culture. I mean, you could go back as far as the beginning of the 16th century, about 1500, when the English composer John Dunstable invented a new sound, the sound of the third in harmony, something that's very, very important to Western harmony. And he invented it well, he didn't invent it, but he started to write pieces with a lot of thirds in it. And it was only because he went to France with the army that French and Burgundian composers started to hear this new form of harmony, the third, And from there, Burgundian composers like William Dufay and all these other composers of that period in what might be called as the Burgundian Renaissance started to write their music in what they called the English countenance, which was this special form of harmony. Now that's gone on throughout history. It's not just the Beethovens and the Mozarts and the Haydns, and Haydn, more than one visit to England, or Handel, for example, growing up in Halle and Hanover, and then going to Italy and then coming to settle in Britain. It's not just those exchanges. It's also in popular music. It's pretty formative years for the Beatles. We're going to Hamburg. Now we're sort of part and parcel of the same thing. You mentioned Edward Elgar. Edward Elgar's he loved Germany. The Germans loved his music. He felt that he was writing in a German style. He was kind of a great admirer of Brahms, and his Nimrod, probably the most famous piece he wrote from the Enigma Variations, was a eulogy basically to his best friend, August Jaeger, who was a German music critic who lived in Britain. And he was trying to sound like a slow movement of a Beethoven symphony when he did it. It was a conscious effort to sound like a German, because he believed the Germans had music wrapped up and they had wonderful composers. I would say probably my favorite composer is Bach. And there are probably not many composers in the world who've lived since Bach who did not think he was kind of key to the whole Western music pattern, and everybody's learnt Bach and understood harmony through Bach. These are indivisible links between us and the landmass of Europe. I think all musicians in Britain think of themselves as being Europeans in terms of the musical background. And it gets even more complicated when you look at folk music, because the travel between folk musicians across these islands and into northern Scandinavia, etc., has been such that you probably can't untangle the bits that are from one place or the other, because musicians travel between these places and carry the germs of new ideas and sounds, and that's going to go and continue. But the big difference between, say, when the Beatles went to Hamburg, when they had enormous difficulty, by the way, getting there and coming back, and in fact, if they hadn't left when they did, George Harrison was about to be deported.
This was European Red Fleet, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was not easy to travel to Europe in those days.
There may have been a drugs issue as well. There may have been a drugs issue too.
Well, I think all sorts of issues, including getting paid and all sorts of difficulties. However, it was very formative for them, but it was very difficult to do in those days. What's happened in between all these people we're talking about and now is the last 30 years with the single market and the freedom of movement has made that turn into a flood of musicians going backwards and forwards across the English Channel, and have informed and enriched our musical life enormously. And we're probably the country that benefited the most from freedom of movement in terms of our creative industries and our service industries. We probably benefit most of all the countries in the EU from that exchange. So it is a tragedy for our musical scene that we're now beached and cut off from what used to be our domestic market of 400 million people. And people ask, how is it possible that America became so predominant in popular music in the 20th century? Well, one reason it did that was because it was possible for a band in New Orleans or Tennessee or New York or Chicago to go and tour 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 cities in a bus. And there were no complications of any kind, and they had a huge market of potential record buyers, and they had radio stations that could play their music. They didn't in those days. All those famous old acts, one or two came to Europe when they became very famous, but mostly they made their names and created their careers in the vast internal market of the United States. And for the last 30 years, we have enjoyed that same privilege in our own home market of the single market. And that's what's happened.
We've become a kind of hub, haven't we?
Yes.
Which has actually attracted huge numbers of continental Europeans to work and base themselves in London, precisely because they are at the centre of a hub. And we stand to give a lot of that up, don't we, because of Brexit?
I think we are giving it up. And I think that, it's probably Berlin will take the mantle. I would say, musically speaking, is becoming the new London. From film music and all sorts of other reasons to do with high tech and making it a very easy place to work and move, and very music friendly city, probably will take over the mantle, although we don't know for sure. I think it's going to become much more difficult. I think what people don't realize is that, of course, the classic Brexit argument is we'll go and do it somewhere else instead. Go to Thailand or tour in Vietnam or go do more tours in America. it is possible to tour these other far-flung places, but you can only really do it if you're incredibly successful, have vast amounts of sponsorship, because it's extremely expensive, not just the travel and the carrying of the equipment and all the rest of it, and the visas and the carnets, but it's also very difficult to get these visas unless you are pretty well established and you've got the administrative backup to be able to do this. So what will happen is that, still huge acts will still be able to go to Europe and still do that, but we won't become the hub anymore, for example, for American tours, who usually set up in Britain, got all their haulage sorted out here and their gear and their backup, and then went on tours of the EU countries from using Britain as a base. That's not going to happen. They'll have to find a base there. And we have a whole ecology of that economy there, which is just going to collapse because Britain's not large enough. And going to Thailand or Japan or on tour, or Australia, is incredibly expensive and difficult thing to do.
Yeah, and for all those young artists and musicians for whom the few hundred quid that they're now going to have to start spending and the delays that they're going to have to enter into to get work visas or get all their equipment through customs, this is the difference between being able to do the job and not being able to do the job, to be frank, isn't it? That's what's going to happen.
I mean, it was quite normal. So, for example, if you were a young opera singer and you wanted to learn your trade and you were starting out, there are, 3 or 4 professional opera houses in Britain where you could do that, but there are something like 40 in Germany and 40 in France and 40 in Italy themselves. So there actually was an ecology there of places you could go and work and learn your trade over a period of time, especially when you were young and starting out, where it was easy and cheap to do it. That Britain cannot support that. We don't have the number of opera houses or musical theatre houses to do that. So it's for people starting out, it's pretty much the end of the road, because our market will shrink right back down again to a small island-based one. And this is a tragedy, really.
Well, we've got to keep up the political pressure. I asked Lord Frost, who's the Brexit minister, about this in the House of Lords. He says rather depressingly that there's no chance of getting temporary visa waivers from the EU. He says what we've now got to do is to negotiate it bilaterally with individual countries. And he says, rather sort of abdicating the job of the government, he says that the music industry itself needs to start developing relationships with the governments of France and Germany and Italy to get them to do it. Well, this is very much the low point of our relations with Europe at the moment. But all of those people listening and watching, I hope we can get those bilateral arrangements improved so that at least we can get as much touring with as little red tape as possible. But this needs to be the first stage in basically getting back into the single market, doesn't it, over the next few years? Because the only way we can sort this.
I mean, the visas, I'm afraid I'm relatively skeptical about what the government's going to be able to achieve anyway, for all sorts of reasons. And they had 4 years to do it in talks and they didn't. So it's obviously not a priority to them. But I think there's another issue here, which is that the visas are only one part of the problem. The other big whammy is we left the customs union, which was not on the ballot paper in June 2016. No one said we're going to leave the customs union. That is an insane act, economic folly, to have left the customs union, because that affects the cabotage rules about haulage, it affects the VAT, and it affects carnets and the traveling of valuable instruments, etc., across borders. And that is going to end up as more expensive and more of a penalty and more administrative red tape than even the visas. So even let's say we can organize some bilateral deal with the French and Italian and Spanish and German governments, which are the main ones we tour to and we work in, that won't cover the customs issues to do with VAT. It won't cover the haulage issues to do with vehicles not able to stop more than 2 places before coming back to Britain, etc., etc. And those things are not unentanglement, and we can't untangle them as an industry. They can only be untangled if we go back into the customs union, which for some peculiar reason didn't stay in, even though we could have left the EU and stayed in the customs union. So I'm skeptical that we're going to get anywhere. And I think it is simply going to mean a shrinking of our industry, a very important industry for our economy, by the way. And, it's interesting, isn't it, when you sometimes I put out things about this on social media and people who are Brexiters say, oh, well, it doesn't really matter, who cares, bunch of lovers doing the arts. The thing is, anybody in Britain who wants roads or hospitals or anything to be built, a railway or a new housing to be built, needs the British government to earn money. And how does the British government earn money? It earns money by selling things abroad. And the creative industries are our second biggest earner for Britain every year at the moment, were before the pandemic anyway, after financial services. Anybody who wants anything for the money for our exchequer is going to have to want the creative industries to thrive. It doesn't matter whether you like the arts or not. We're really important to Britain's economy. And what's going to happen is, at the moment, the pandemic is covering up how bad a hit this is going to be for our creative industries, because people at the moment can't travel to work. Yeah. And they can't tour and they can't go abroad. Well, when that opens up and every other economy next year, let's say, starts to do all their services again, they're not going to want a country for whom it's expensive and difficult to do so.
Well, let's hope that these worst case scenarios aren't realised. I'm a professional optimist, and I think that Brexit wasn't the decided will of the British people. The reason we got into this mess is there wasn't that second referendum where people could actually compare the terms of Brexit with what they were promised when they narrowly voted for it. And my view is that opinion will change, even though we're at the kind of high water mark of Boris Johnson and Brexit. I think as the economic and social consequences become clear, things will improve. But let's move from the low politics of Brexit to the high culture of Europe. And in the last few minutes, tell us a bit more about your career, Howard, and how European it's genuinely been. I'm struck by the European influence on your music, and indeed how much of it you've actually written in France and on the continent. Tell us a bit about your career and how we should understand it as European as well as English.
Yes, well, of course, there's the whole heritage of music which comes from Europe. Much great music comes from all over the world. But if you grow up and you're trained here in this part of the world, that's obviously going to be a very key part of your love of music and your skill base. One of the loveliest things about writing concert music that happened to me, I mean, many people may know my TV music and film music from from the first part of my career, but as I've got older, I've done more and more music for concerts and for church music and for concert performance and musical theatre. And this is performed all over the world, but it's also performed all over Europe. And it is just a wonderful thing. For example, when the choir of Notre Dame Cathedral last March locked down so they couldn't be performing, but also doubly so because the cathedral was burnt out and they couldn't get inside Notre Dame. So they made a virtual recording of a piece of music and sang it as their tribute to the cathedral that they were locked out of. And they chose my Psalm 23, which people will know as the music from the Vicar of Dibley. And they sang it beautifully in impeccable English from their own homes. And it was the most beautiful and moving thing to see this wonderful cultural, iconic place of Notre Dame and their choir singing this piece that I'd written. I found it incredibly moving because so much of my choral music commissions I write in France because we have a second home there in the countryside, in the rural center of France, in the non-fashionable, non-English section of France. And I go there because it's quiet and tranquil and beautiful, and I'm able to sit in a room and write this music. And I write a lot of my choral music there. So it's not just that I'm conscious of Fauré and Dorouflé and the other great composers of choral music across Europe, Mendelssohn, Brahms. It's not that I'm just conscious of them. It's just that actually I'm there. And probably, you could write any music you like wherever you are. And if I were transplanted by magic to Nova Scotia, I'd probably write relatively similar music. But you never know, it might start to sound a bit more Nova Scotian because you absorb the sounds and the life and the rhythm that's around you as you compose. And for me, it's strange. One of my closest friends is a conductor who worked for many years at the Berlin Philharmonic. And when we talk about this, it's very hard to explain to people. It's not just an exchange of us going to one place and do a job. When you go and perform a piece of music with other people in that country, something rather more profound is taking place about the bringing together of peoples. And I think we do often frame this article, and I'm guilty this issue, and I'm guilty of it as well as anybody else, as an economic issue because the arts are terribly important to Britain. But there's the other side of this, which is the arts are good for our well-being as human beings. And that if we want to build bridges with other cultures, and if we want to, get over our problems with people we disagree with, and if we want to somehow build a better life for our children, and by the way, our children will take us back into the EU if we haven't done it first. But if we want to do that, then the arts are pretty much our best thing we've got available to do that with, to build bridges between people, to win the hearts and minds of other people around us. And it has been a big part of our soft power around the world. I don't really like the term soft power because it sounds as if you're imposing something on other people. One of the wonderful things about being a musician is that you see people embrace your music with a kind of love. And it's a fantastically equal relationship you have with your audience, especially if it's your country, your nearest neighbors, whether it's Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, or whether it's France or Germany or any of the other neighbors to us. I was involved, very proud to have been involved as a board member when we built the Sage Gateshead. And one of the great inspirations for the building of the Sage Gateshead was a fantastic arts resource and concert hall in Newcastle. One of the great inspirations for it was the Sibelius Centre in Finland, because there's a great connection between the Northeast and Scotland with Scandinavian countries. And we have so much closeness with cultural closeness, and it's one of the ways we make ourselves close to other people. And that's not just our children going over to do Erasmus programs or our children being taught in school music as well as science subjects. It's also to do with the fact that we actually behave better as human beings, and our society is better generally. If you want to have a collaboration with someone over climate change, you actually, the best thing to do is to have a close relationship with on a range of things, and then talk about how things can be done with climate change. You don't just go for one thing from every country and say, well, we demand this of you, we want fishing rights in this place. Better to have a good relationship with that country all round in the first place, and then ask, to do things together collaboratively. And I can't help thinking that the way forward for the world generally, if we're going to survive these great crises that are heading towards us to do with climate, is that we're going to have to get closer and more collaborative, not separate ourselves off and become more island-like as time goes on. It's the opposite.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think one of the most depressing things about Brexit was one of the early things that happened when it was announced that Britain wouldn't be participating in the European Union Youth Orchestra, which I thought was absolutely monstrous, to stop teenagers and people in their 20s from making music together. I don't think many people who were in the youth orchestra were aware of the fact it was a European Union institution. They thought of it as a European institution, and we need to build that again. But we're running out of time. Just in conclusion, Howard, tell us as a special peak preview for Europe Day aficionados, what are you working on at the moment? What great new works from Howard?
Well, I'm doing several things. I, like a lot of composers, I had a couple of things ready to go on when the pandemic hit. And we're all waiting for venues to be able to be opened for new pieces to be heard. And I mean, I've got 2 new musicals that are waiting in the sidings now. And who knows when theatres are going to be able to open to be able to do those pieces. So there's those. And I can tell you that at least one. No problem?
Are they state secrets, or can you tell us what they are? Your 2 new musicals?
They are secret at the moment, but European culture is very much part, particularly of one. And I've written some commissions that are actually pandemic related. I wrote a piece for the London Symphony Chorus, which is the text of it is just the names of the people who have died who work in the health sector during the pandemic, a kind of musical memorial, which we did as an online version last year with just 122 names, and now it's obviously a much larger number, and it's a rather more significant sized piece because of that. One of the things you learn from that list of names is how indebted we have been to people from other countries to take the sacrifice of this appalling pandemic.
How can people listen to that, Howard? I'm sure there are lots of people.
There's a short version of it on the internet. If you look up London Symphony Chorus, it's called Never to Forget. But we're going to do a longer version of it, but we hope live, possibly in July at the Spitalfields Festival, with a longer list of names that have accumulated tragically since we did that. And I've written a longish commission for choir and brass and keyboards, which is pandemic related, for a choir in Houston in Texas. And they will hopefully do that if they can at the end of this year, because we're all not sure what's going to happen and how these things will open, but we're trying to proceed in an optimistic way, taking after you, Andrew, and being positive and optimistic that things will open up and things will get better to be able to perform these pieces.
Well, we're really looking forward to your new works, and this is a great place to end on, because of course the pandemic knows no borders, and it's at one level a terrible tragedy, but also an extraordinary tribute to the human spirit, and to the spirit of solidarity, and to the spirit of cooperation. And I think we'll all be wanting to listen to your post-pandemic works, and people in 10, 20 years' time will be debating what was the impact of the pandemic on the evolution of the compositions of Howard Goodall. Thanks very much.
Many others.
Happy Europe Day to everyone, and I think this is the day we should all be listening to the Ode to Joy. Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Thank you very much there to Andrew Adonis, the new chair of the European Movement, and to Howard Goodall, the award-winning composer. We're running a few minutes late at the moment, but just for anyone who joins the live stream a little bit late, these are the approximate times of the remainder of the event. Coming up, we've got a youth panel that the European Movement UK has organised. We've got a showcase video from European Movement Ireland, and we've got some other individual videos in there as well. We'll be moving on to the youth panel very shortly, but first, just got a couple of short videos for you from some other MEPs from both Italy and also from Belgium.
For me, Europe Day is a special day when we celebrate our unity of different cultures, different histories, different peoples, a unity in diversity that is the strength of our union, a union based on a model of freedom and a model of social organization. I think that this freedom and social model is the one treasure that we need to bring to the future, to the new generations, with a European Union that is able to be a factor of peace, of dialogue with the rest of the world, and a place where everyone can be able to flourish and to be happy. So let's celebrate our Europe Day together.
Gelukkige dag van Europa. Meer dan ooit is dit een speciale Europese verjaardag. We vieren de 70ste verjaardag van het Verdrag van Parijs. Dit verdrag riep de Europese gemeenschap van kolen en staal in het leven. Het was de start van de Europese samenwerking die aan de basis lag van de Europese Unie zoals we die vandaag ook kennen. Het was ook het definitieve einde van het oorlogsgeweld. Sindsdien kennen we 70 jaar vrede op ons continent. 70 jaar waarin onze welvaart enorm toegenomen is. 70 jaar ook met ups en downs natuurlijk, maar wel 70 jaar eenheid door verscheidenheid. 2021 is jammer genoeg ook het eerste jaar waarin we echt zonder de burgers van het Verenigd Koninkrijk zullen samenleven en werken in de Europese Unie. Ik denk aan de vele ondernemers, de vele studenten, ja, de vele burgers voor wie dit een belangrijke impact heeft. De nieuwe toekomst moet uitwijzen hoe we met elkaar zullen samenwerken. Ik denk in het bijzonder aan de vele Britten met een groot Europees hart. Zij die niet wilden dat het Verenigd Koninkrijk uit de Europese Unie zou vertrekken. We zijn jullie niet vergeten. Integendeel, we staan nog steeds met open armen klaar om jullie te verwelkomen en om samen met jullie een nieuw vervolgstuk van onze geschiedenis te schrijven. Uit het oog, maar niet uit het hart. Dit jaar wordt ook de conferentie over de toekomst van Europa afgetrapt. De conferentie is ons duidelijke engagement naar alle Europese burgers toe om te tonen dat het ons menens is met die toekomst en met de noodzaak om hervormingen in te zetten. Voor een betere Europese Unie, voor een beter Europa, voor vrede en welvaart voor alle Europese burgers.
Saj Karim, member of European Movement Executive, and I'm delighted today to be joined at this panel, which I'm chairing, by two very prominent members of our youth movements. I suppose I'm here to balance up the equilibrium so far as age is concerned in that respect. But now turning to two of our very active and forward-looking and innovative members, I have Anna Granger, who has been absolutely instrumental in ensuring that we were able to establish the European Movement's Save e-Twinning campaign. So Anna will tell us a little bit about that in a moment. And then, of course, we have the president of the youth movement, Julian Loitap, who is joining us from Spain, I understand. So welcome to both of you to the panel. I'm in the United Kingdom, and we're going to kick off straight away. First of all, I'm going to come to you, Anna, with a view to hearing from you about your involvement with European movement and the broader issues.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm a modern languages teacher in Coventry in the West Midlands, and I have been teaching for over 20 years now. I started in secondary, I've taught adults, and I now teach in a primary school, teaching Spanish to children from the age of 7 up to 11. And I got involved in e-twinning, which is part of Erasmus Plus, about 4 or 5 years ago now, and it's absolutely, well, it just changed what I did in the classroom, really. The demographic of my school is that I teach in a very deprived area. We have lots of children who have never been out of their local area. They don't really have sort of aspirations, many of them. And e-twinning really helped to break down those barriers. It's helped them to look at the world around them. It helped them to understand what was further than their own front door, further than their own country. We challenged lots of stereotypes because of it. I discovered that one story that I always tell is we had some letters come over from a school in Turkey that we've been working with, and I had some children who were reading out the letters, and one of them sort of read out this one letter, and it said that this child had blue eyes and brown hair, and she sort of gasped as she read it, and she went, "They've got brown hair and blue eyes." And I said, "Well, what do you expect? Did you think they had two heads?" And this child, they all just looked at me, and I was like, "Oh my goodness, you did, didn't you?" And even though we have lots and lots of children who have migrated from other countries, asylum seekers, children that have come from other European countries, the British children accept that those children speak different languages, but they'd never really sort of realised that even though they're the same as them, they like the same things, they play football, they like the same music, they like dancing, things like that, that children who live in other countries might also be the same. So really, really sort of, broken down those barriers, challenged those stereotypes, and really added interest to the curriculum as well. I think, the UK curriculum can be a little bit dry, and children don't always understand how it fits into their lives. And by being able to work with children in other countries on the same things that you're learning in your classroom can really sort of just make it a little bit more interesting and help children to understand how it sort of fits into everyday life, really. And learning from each other is just so important. It improves their communication skills. They have to really think about their own language, because children that we're working with quite often don't have English as their first language, assuming we're doing a project in English. And they have to really think carefully about their own language. So it improves those basic skills that they need as well. And also for language learning, there was a report that came out in 2019 that said that the lack of language skills costs the UK economy £48 billion a year. And we've really got to start teaching languages at a much younger age and making it more important in the curriculum in order to bridge those gaps for when children get older and they get jobs. It's so much harder now as well. The great thing about e-twinning is that it was a secure platform. It was fully inclusive. It really was the hidden gem of Erasmus, and I've done projects with children as young as 3 years old, and Turing, the new Turing scheme, just doesn't allow for that. You can't take 3-year-olds on mobilities abroad. You can't travel with them. I've also got friends who use e-twinning in pupil referral units, and yeah, it's just so much harder now post-Brexit to actually make those links with other schools abroad. E-twinning was such a safe platform. You knew 100% that everybody on that platform was a teacher, and you knew who you were inviting into your classroom.
Well, Anna, thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you for all the fantastic work you are doing. Please do keep it up. I certainly can relate to so much of what you are speaking about. I grew up at a time, I started my schooling when we had just entered the European Union in Blackburn in Lancashire, in a very proud working class area. And my generation, for us, there was really two defining moments for people like me. Back in 1989-1990, one was the release of Nelson Mandela from prison. And the other was watching people with their bare hands bringing down the Berlin Wall. And that completely changed the canvas upon which we could paint our life story. And it troubles me immensely, it pains me to see that future generations are having all of that taken away from them. So thank you for all that you are doing. Julian, you have a fantastic backdrop. Do please tell us where you are. And on that note, I see from your background in your biography, you are biologically, truly, completely mixed up European in every way imaginable. Welcome.
Thanks very much, and thank you for your kind invitation to this panel today and for the opportunity to celebrate Europe Day with you. Indeed, I'm tuning in from the north of Spain. And that's not only to wish you, to send you very sunny wishes from here, but also it has a true link to Europe Day and to this event, because I'm actually here because of a profound friendship that I founded with my friend Tulio, who studies here in the University of Navarra, and who I got to know during my Erasmus in Lyon. As you said, I'm European in many different ways. I grew up in Austria. And my parents are both German. I then went to Belgium for an internship and then moved to Aberdeen up north to start my undergraduate. My current academic year is spent on my Erasmus in Lyon in France. And since I am currently on a break between my two exam seasons, I decided to invite to visit my friend Tulio here in the north of Spain. And if you wonder about my last name, it's actually Hungarian. So I also have Hungarian ancestors, even though I unfortunately don't speak any word of it. I do, however, speak English, French, and German fluently, and also a little bit of Spanish, and I'm currently learning Russian. And I have to really connect to what Anna referred to with regard to language learning, because not only can I refer to the aspect of language learning and how that really kind of helped me connect to so many different people from all over Europe, which I probably would have never met, and I certainly wouldn't have been able to have friendships with if I didn't speak English to begin with, or French in some other cases. And secondly, in terms of linking up to what Anna said with exchanges, I really became a European thanks to exchanges. I joined a program that's called the European Youth Parliament, in 2015, and I went on those youth conferences where we basically simulated the European Parliament. There was different levels of difficulty and different levels of officiality, let's say, and it starts on a very low scale. Yeah, children I wouldn't maybe say, but young people, young adults from the age of 14 onwards can partake in those simulations, and we debated European politics together. And this is how I came and met people in Armenia, for example, and I noticed that young people in Armenia share pretty much the same problems that we face in Central Europe. And this connected me so much with different people from all over the world and with different cultures that I really consider myself a European citizen, and on the wider scale also a world citizen. Even though obviously exchange within Europe is so much easier thanks to all those programs, thanks to the freedom of movement, and thanks to all the other advantages that EU membership brings, which of course we as Young European Movement UK and as European Movement UK are very, very sad to have lost.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for all the work that you, as president of our youth movement, for the European movement. And we have, of course, today, many people joining us from various other parts of Europe as well today, and many from within the European Union. And of course, our overall aim as a movement is to make sure that the United Kingdom remains as closely aligned as is possible to the European Union as we take steps, concrete steps, to work our way back to our, what I believe is our natural place, right at the heart of Europe, with our European family inside the European Union. I hope that I will certainly see that day, but I'm sure many of our European Youth Movement members will see that time. Now, I just want to explore one or two further issues with you. Anna, if I may, you have contact with, I mean, I'm referring to both of you as young people, but Anna, you have contact with even younger people on a daily basis through your working life. I wonder if you could share some of their feelings about, you know, Britain and Europe and how they are feeling about their identity now at this moment in time.
Yes, it's interesting actually. I mean, we've got lots of children who do speak other languages, and they come alive when you sort of speak to them about their you know, their backgrounds, their cultures, or ask them to actually you know, teach you a few words of their language. As for, I mean, the British children, I suppose it's not something I really discuss that openly with them, because they're quite a bit younger really, but they really enjoy their language learning. They love e-twinning. We recently won an award for a project that we did last year when we were still part of e-twinning, and they were so proud of that, and just really enjoy that sort of connection with other people. I had one boy actually. We did an international day a couple of years ago, and I'd got a big map of the world out on the table in the corridor, and he came past and he sort of said to me, he said, "Oh, there's some really nice places out there, aren't there?" And I sort of said, "Yeah, there are." I said, you know, with were you in my assembly this morning when I was sort of showing you, you know, a video that I'd found all about sort of different places that you could go and see? And he said, yes, he said, but my parents would tell me that I'm poor and I can't do that. So I sort of said to him, but you can. I said, you don't need much, you don't need money to be able to do it. You know, you can work your way around the world, you can work your way around Europe and see different places. And, you know, I just feel like I was starting to really motivate them and get them to see that they could do that. And suddenly it's all been taken away from them. And I don't know, because my children they're not secondary age, I don't think they really understand that at the moment. But what really upsets me is that when they get a bit older and they realise they can't do that anymore, that they're going to sort of turn around and say, well, Mrs. Granger lied to us, we can't do that. And obviously at the time that I was really trying to sort of raise those aspirations and show them what the opportunities were out there, that still was accessible to them. So I hope that answered your question, because as I say, it's not really something that I'm able to discuss openly with them as a teacher, and particularly in a primary school.
Thank you, Anna. Julian, you put your finger up, you wanted the floor.
Yeah, I wanted the floor just to quickly, again, add on to what Anna said and to fully agree with it. And I think giving back opportunities or trying to maintain them, trying to safeguard them in a way is really key for us as European movement on a wider scale, and specifically for us as Young European Movement, especially in collaboration with our European counterparts. Because I think our key mission as Young European Movement UK, and also in a way as European Movement UK, is to really reconnect with the rest of Europe, and I particularly say with the rest of Europe, because in English language we often say we travel to Europe if we go to the continent, but we really have to get this change of language right. We are part of Europe and we're going to continental Europe and not to Europe. So let's say we connect with the rest of Europe, and doing that with young people specifically who have lost opportunities in terms of mobility like Erasmus, freedom of movement and many other ways, is something that we are working on. And this is why, for example, our European umbrella organization is organizing a simulation of the European Parliament that takes place mid-June in Strasbourg in France, in the actual European Parliament, or why we are organizing a policy discussion forum in Barcelona in Spain in the beginning of June. And why there is many other physical events, which obviously were on hold for a while now, but which are slowly coming back now to give young people, to give Young European Movement UK members and volunteers and supporters the opportunity to meet other European people. Because in the end, we can do a lot of talk about okay, we are all European and this is all one shared thing. But if we really want people to understand it and to live it in their hearts and minds, then we have to send them on those mobility programs, or at least we have to connect them with other people, because where the social connection is formed is where the identification happens. And to make that identification happen, we are really, really behind getting YEM UK members to those events and making them meet other Europeans. Because I think at the same time, what we see across Europe and amongst our young European family, with our around 30 partner organizations across Europe, we don't see this. But in the wider public, we see it, that people think that the UK and also young people in the UK are not interested at all in Europe. And I think it might be the case that because of Brexit, there was a lot of disappointment and apathy. But in the end, feeling connected to the rest of Europe and feeling connected to other young people and sharing the same needs and the same visions and the same wants for the future, this is actually something that's absolutely the case. And we have to make sure that we get this voice out into the world and that we make everyone aware that there is European spirit in the UK. Because the continent, and this is what I experience when I talk to young people and I talk about the fact that I'm active in a pro-European youth movement in the UK, they are super excited about this. And they tell me, oh, that is actually happening. Young people do actually care. There is actually a sector out there which is unhappy about Brexit. And yes, there is. And yes, we are strong. And this is the day where we have to celebrate. And we should do so in connecting to other European counterparts who wave the flag with us, to keep the relationship as close as possible, and to potentially also see a rejoin happening, even though this is nothing that obviously would be happening in the immediate horizon, but that young people would definitely desire in the long run.
Thank you very much for that very optimistic reaching out. And I'll come to you in just a second. Thank you very much, Julian, for that very optimistic assessment. But can I just point towards one of the challenges and see what plans you have for the European movement in facing that? Actually, I can speak in very real, direct terms in terms of what is happening today in the United Kingdom. We are seeing election results coming in, which are showing that on a values basis, a real split is emerging within the United Kingdom today. We have Scotland moving much more to the left of the political spectrum. Wales is doing the same, but England is taking a rightward turn. And there is very much a developing feeling, certainly in Scotland, that its values are starting to differ from those of England to such an extent that union is to be called into question. And when one looks across the European Union, today in virtually every member state see issues of identity being pushed in a negative way, sometimes by very prominent politicians at the forefront of politics in individual countries. And the fastest rising form of extremism is actually far-right extremism, which is also identity-based. And what is very concerning is that there are large numbers of young people that are getting involved with such movements, I suppose is the best word for them. What can the young European movement do to reinforce our values and our true identity, to push back against those negative, destructive forces?
I think one of the profound things about the young European movement is that we think in the sense of Europeanization, and we focus on the thing that we have in common rather than what divides us. And this concerns us as a consortium of European states, including the United Kingdom, as well as different regions of different member states of the EU. It's not as if other member states in the EU wouldn't have identity issues. I'm now, as I said, in San Sebastian, in Donostia, in the north of Spain, which is the Basque country. And you know that the Basque country, and I've actually had this hat here, is connected in the rest of Spain with separatism and with wanting to depart. And I think what separatism and the kind of lack of affiliation to the nation state shows is the lack of autonomy over certain political issues. And this is something that many states struggle with, and with several states try to tackle with federalization, like Italy, France, Germany, or a system like in Spain with autonomous communities with certain rights, actually sometimes different rights, and that's comparable to the UK system as well. And I think if you look at the history of Europe, the history of people who had a federalist idea of Europe, who wanted to establish different levels of government that would tackle different political decisions, always as close to the citizen as possible, but at the level where it made most sense, where it's most efficient and most effective. If you look at this history, I think then this provides an excellent solution to solving independency and sovereignty struggles, as we could also see in the fight for peace in Northern Ireland, where EU membership of both states, the Republic of Ireland and the United Kingdom, and including Northern Ireland, actually put peace to the whole thing, and actually made the discussions about the border irrelevant, because the border is not relevant if you don't notice it. And this is what we saw so brutally in the beginning of this year, when things really started to kick in again, and when controls started to happen again, and when particularly young people were really, really agitated by the fact that this history that maybe their parents talked to them about, and they told them, oh, this is so great that we got the EU membership and this all was resolved, when this re-emerged. So I think that Europe and a federalized system, and many people hate the word federalism, but in principle, federalism just means deciding as close to the citizen as possible. It doesn't mean that you federalize into a centralized state, into a United States of Europe where everything is dictated from Brussels. Not at all. Federalism is a political debate and a political discussion, and the debate that we are leading as young Europeans and as pro-Europeans all over the continent is actually, what is the level where we want politics to be resolved? And not even within our organization as Young European Movement, not even within my board. I might be of the same opinion which question I want to be resolved, I want to be tackled with, on which level. But it is the willingness to give off power to the regional level and to give off power to the European level, and that is important to solve current struggles. And we as young European movements, if you want to call us this way, all over the continent, including the UK, we believe that in many ways there is too much power with the nation state, and there is too little power with the European level to tackle the really big struggles, like, for example, digital taxation, tax evasion, security and defense, climate policy, and really putting Europe out there also as a strong defender of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. And in other ways, there is maybe too little power on the regional level, on the local level. For example, if you come to the UK and the example of cycle paths having to be approved by the Ministry of Transport, why can't the municipality not decide that on their own? So it's those questions that we need to tackle. Where do we decide what is? Where do we decide what political domain? This is how we can resolve independency and sovereignty struggles. Because at some point, if you have a good system that's working, the question becomes irrelevant. And this was the case in Northern Ireland. Unfortunately, it re-emerged because of obvious decisions that were taken, and it was resolved in the Basque Country, which has a lot of autonomy now, and where the real independentist movement is very, very weak at the moment.
Thank you. I know you were keen to jump in a little earlier. My apologies, I wasn't able to come to you immediately.
No, that's great, because actually everything that Julius has just been saying as well actually sort of fits into what I was going to say before. So and I've thought of a few other things as well actually. So talking about sort of the far right, and people getting involved in that and what have you. I think the big issue in the UK is fear. It's not understanding sort of other people, and you were talking about connections earlier as well, and education has got a huge part to play in this. There's no political education really in schools, in England anyway, and so people are not sort of taught about, sort of how to think these issues through almost. And I know there is actually in Scotland, and Scotland obviously voted to stay within the EU, and they actually teach politics from the age of 7, and even if it's just sort of children knowing and understanding how Parliament works, how MPs are elected and things like that, but there's just nothing really going on in the UK. So it's that misunderstanding, you know, fake news, not being able to understand what is not true that's printed in the newspapers, like, you know, bendy bananas, and believing that we have to follow all the rules, you know, all the laws that Brussels makes, and not understanding that actually we make our own laws, and our laws are different to laws in different countries. And so I think education has got a massive part to play, and particularly language education as well. You know, we hear so often, oh, we're such a nation of bad language learners, but we're not. Our brains don't work any differently to anybody else. It's just that we teach it badly. And I'm not saying that we've got bad teachers in the UK. I've said this to every single one of my classes this week, actually. It's that we don't give it enough time. So in primary school, we have one lesson a week. I fought for several years to get an hour of language teaching in my school, and I've recently just had it cut down again to 45 minutes on paper, but by the time we get into classrooms and get started and what have you, that might only be sort of 35 minutes. I worked out over the course of half a term, I get about 3.5 hours. And over the course of a year, about 28.5 hours, I think it worked out at. And it's just not enough time. So you forget 75% of what you've learned if you don't revise it within a week. So we're constantly sort of starting from a lower, you know, we're not saying, well, we did this yesterday and you'll have only forgotten a few words and we've just got to recap those before we can move on. So we just teach it badly. And that's sort of, and I think, we're scared of languages, we're scared of cultures, different cultures, because of the education system that needs reforming, really. We need more time for languages and better policies, really. And, you know, and through that education, we can start to get to, we need to start young. We need to start with young people and sort of educate them so that they're not thinking that we're being told what to do by other countries, and they can make their own decisions. And yeah, does that make sense?
It does. I mean, you've summed up very neatly there what so many of us have directly experienced, certainly at the hands of many parts of the British media, and the way that they really have led 40 years plus of misinformation, drip feed into the British mindset that has so misinformed people today that they are simply making decisions against their own interests. Yeah. You have both been absolutely fantastic. Thank you. And we're going to wind up now. And really, I just want a message from each of you. And I'll come to you first, Julius. What is the message you would like us to give from our platform to young people, to give them some hope about how we hope their future will play out?
I would say, especially on a humoristic note with regards to Europe Day, perhaps, and focusing on the Europeanization of things, I would say, never mind what politicians might tell you, ignore it at times, feel European, be European, think European, act European. Europeans all over the world, if you want, or the continent, including the UK, unite and co-create together. Be this on a social level, on a friendship base, be this because of sports and because you like to go hiking with some Spanish friends in the Pyrenees. And maybe you want to add some friends from France, from the northern side of the Pyrenees. Or be this because you want to conduct a project together. Be this because you maybe met them in one of our events that we organize across Europe, or because you maybe have family links. But make that European spirit yours and don't let it be dominated by ideological, identity-based politics of the current government that tries to tear young people from the UK and young people from the rest of Europe more and more apart to nourish a generation that allegedly is more unique and more nation-focused and more British than it was before with EU membership. Let's fight against this negative narrative and let's shorten the English Channel and bring us closer together.
Julius, thank you so much. Anna, what is your message for the young people?
I certainly echo what Julius has said, and I think I'd say as well, get involved. You know, I think so many people think that their voice is not being listened to, but there are lots of us that really are, you know, trying to fight this and get that information out, and you know, reach out to those people that really are sort of fighting, join that fight, and yeah, together, you know, together we can make things happen.
Thank you very much for those very powerful messages to both of you, Julius and Anna. Thank you very much for making the time to join with us today. I am sure that everybody watching this today has taken so much energy from what both of you have said. And if you are watching this and you believe in the values and what we are trying to achieve, and you are not yet a member of the European movement, please take that step. Come and join us. As Anna has just said, together we can make things happen. Come and join us on this journey. Let's push back against these divisive forces in a message, a positive message of unity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all of our speakers there. That was Saj Karim, former MEP for the Northwest of England, Julius Leiter, the president of the Young European Movement UK, and Anna Granger, one of our local activists who was instrumental in starting our E20 petition. We've got a couple more videos for you from some MEPs, and then we've got some more content for you. I'm going to start now with a short video of solidarity from Jude Kirton-Darling, who's a former MEP for the Northeast of England.
Hi, I'm Jude Kirton-Darling, former Labour MEP for the Northeast of England, and currently Deputy General Secretary of a European Trade Union Federation, Industrial Europe, that brings together workers from across the manufacturing, energy and mining sectors across 38 European countries. And I'm delighted to celebrate Europe Day with you this year. All the more important because the challenges that we face as a continent are considerable. This year has been very difficult for many people as a result of the pandemic. We would have never guessed when we left the European Parliament on the 31st of January that just a few weeks later we would be locked down in different countries as a result of the global pandemic. And I found myself locked down in Belgium, where I now work representing workers across Europe. And that work has intensified because we need to ensure that workers remain unified across our continent, because the UK may have left the European Union, but many of the rights which stem from our former European membership are the rights on which working people in Britain depend today. And so continued unity within the trade union movement and working class across Europe are extremely important to ensure the future of those workers' rights also in Britain in the future. And we may have left the European Union, but we still have strong trade relations, multinational companies that have supply chains running across this continent. We're extremely integrated with each other. And that means trade unions working together and workers cooperating across borders has never been more important. So that's my message to you on Europe Day. It's a great day to celebrate European nations coming together, pooling their efforts to tackle common challenges in a peaceful and in a negotiated way. And we in the trade union movement continue to press to ensure that workers on both sides of the channel continue to build and strengthen their connections so that we can maintain our unity and ensure that we're pushing for a fairer, a sustainable and a prosperous continent for all. So happy Europe Day, and let's work together to maintain our links, to maintain our networks for the benefit of everybody.
Today we celebrate 71 years since the Schuman Declaration, which marks the beginning of the Europe that we know today. A Europe of freedom, peace, unity and cooperation. As a Czech, having been born under a communist regime, I know that we cannot take these things for granted. But today we also look forward to the future, towards the Europe that we want to build. This Europe Day, we inaugurate the Conference of the Future of Europe, which will give everyone a chance to shape the future of Europe together. Happy Europe Day.
Thank you very much to both of our speakers just now, Jude Kirton-Darling, former MEP for the North East of England, and Dita Charanzová, MEP from Czechia. Now, wherever you are in Europe, whether you're in the UK or in another country around Europe, local activism is at the key of our movement. So please do check out europeanmovement.eu for the list of European movement councils in your country, and please do get involved with them. I'd like to now play a video from Louise Brown, who you'll have seen commenting in the comments section of the video as the event's gone on, with a message from the North East of England for you.
I would just like to thank you from North East of Europe for listening, and wish you all a happy Europe Day. You know, we're still in Europe. We might have left the EU, but we're still in Europe geographically. So we feel like we still want to celebrate it. But we do realise up here just how much help we've had from the EU funding. In fact, I was just at Hartlepool Marina on Wednesday, and I was reminded by the fact that has EU funded. That was very much an EU project, and I don't think a lot of people know that, and it's absolutely beautiful there. I mean, I could reel off a whole list of places that are EU funded up here, but we haven't got time. But one thing that did catch my eye was when I work in Darlington sometimes, and I got off the train there, and there was a sign there talking about the EU COVID recovery fund there. You know, specifically putting hand sanitizers in the street, trying to encourage people to go back and spend their money on the high street, basically high street recovery in all senses of the word. And it made me feel really sad that obviously that funding is going to run out at some point soon, and I feel quite lucky that we're still receiving it, even though we've left the EU. So yeah, that was something that really jumped out to me, because just the other month there was some local North East Council leaders were in the newspapers talking about how they were concerned that the EU funding was not going to be matched by the government up here, not replaced in full anyway, and they were, there still hasn't been any final decisions on that. And I just thought how sad it was, because all that funding did create such useful and lovely spaces up here, and I do worry about what's going to happen afterwards. But we are still going to celebrate Europe Day and put that to one side for one afternoon.
Thank you very much, Louise. That was Louise Brown, one of our local activists from North East of Europe, and I'd like to thank her and all of our activists from all across the UK and all of the European movement members and activists across the entire of Europe for everything that they continue to do for the movement. Now, this event's been about solidarity, about coming together and talking about what it means to be European. And before we move on to our final portion of the event, I'd like just to play a short video that was prepared by European Movement in Scotland with a message of solidarity to our friends on mainland Europe.
We're representing people from all across Scotland, expressing our love for and continuing desire to be part of Europe, whatever the political circumstances.
Because I believe that working together, the 500 million people in Europe's various civilizations are the best hope there is for humanity's continued existence on planet Earth.
The UK and Ireland joined the European Union together in the early 1970s. For the first time in 1,000 years, the citizens of each island voted to be part of a wider union, which at its core is about the willingness to live peacefully alongside each other.
For me, the European Union is about peace, and it's where Europeans can share our wonderful commonalities and our rich diversities.
As a mix of Scottish, Danish, English and Irish raised in Belgium, I feel profoundly European. And rationally, leaving the peace project that is the EU harms us. It harms us economically, culturally and socially, and means my children miss out on the opportunities that I had.
Joining the European Union meant being part of something that reached out well beyond the walls of our wee country and opened up a huge number of opportunities.
After centuries of recurrent wars in Europe, closer ties with Europe meant generations in Europe enjoyed peace. I wish it felt equally certain for generations to come. The loss of freedom of movement, which allows us all to live, love, work and study anywhere in Europe, is devastating. I also want to be able to easily see my beloved sister in Greece, nephew in Spain, cousins in Sweden and friends all over Europe.
Thank you to European Movement in Scotland for those lovely words of solidarity to our friends on the mainland of Europe. Now, there are groups, European Movement councils in countries all across Europe, both inside and outside the EU. And one of the more active ones of that is European Movement in Ireland, who have done a lot of events over the past year since we've been in sort of COVID lockdown. I would like to finish this really positive Europe Day event with a video they've created for us, showing some of the great events they've had in the past year. Happy Europe Day, everybody.
Distinguished guests, a very warm welcome to all of you joining us across Europe and indeed further afield to all our friends as far away as the United States for today's very special occasion. That is European Movement Ireland's European of the Year Awards ceremony. We finally today have the opportunity to bestow this award to the EU's Head of Task Force for Relations with the UK and our European of the Year, Mr. Michel Barnier. Bonjour, Mr. Barnier. Bonjour, Michel.
Good morning to all of you.
Good morning. It is lovely to see you. It is now time to hear from Taoiseach Micheál Martin, the Minister for Foreign Affairs and Defence, Simon Coveney, and the Minister for European Affairs, Thomas Byrne.
Dear Michel, as Taoiseach, as Honorary President of the European Movement of Ireland, and on my own behalf, I am delighted to convey warmest congratulations to you on the occasion of your recognition as European of the Year 2020. Over the past 4 years, you have come to represent for so many of us here in Ireland all that is best about the European Union.
I can't think of anyone who's more deserving of this title. I had the privilege of working closely with you from the very start of the Brexit negotiations, and you have never faltered. Throughout our regular meetings in Brussels and Dublin and beyond, I've been struck not only by how effectively and persuasively you've represented the EU's interests and values, but also by the enormous effort you've made to understand the specific issues affecting our island.
Your unwavering commitment to ensuring that the principles of the European Union and the interests of its member states, not least of all Ireland's, are protected, has been crystal clear at every juncture during this process.
Since Michel was appointed to lead the negotiations on the United Kingdom's withdrawal from the European Union and the subsequent negotiations on the future EU-UK relationship, it's fair to say that an unprecedented level of understanding has developed between him and the Irish people. He has earned our universal respect and the trust of the 27 member states of the European Union to negotiate on all our behalf. It is for these reasons we thank you. We pay tribute to you today and present you with European Movement Ireland's award as our very deserved European of the Year.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is my very great honour to present Mr. Michel Barnier with European Movement Ireland's European of the Year award designed by Waterford Crystal. Michel, sincerest congratulations to you. I would now like to invite you to deliver your European of the Year award acceptance address. The virtual floor is yours.
Good morning to all of you online, and thank you very much. Let me start by thanking European Movement Ireland, its chairperson, Maurice Pratt, and you, Noel, for the kind words of introduction. Let me also thank very sincerely Mihol, Simon, and Thomas for their very kind words. It is truly an honor to receive your European of the Year award, this award. And it means even more to me, knowing that I am the first non-Irish person to receive it, even though I feel personally a little bit Irish. Ladies and gentlemen, to be or not to be European, or more precisely, to be or not to be in the European Union, that is certainly a question that divided the UK for many years, and most probably will continue to do so in years to come. Never will I forget, never, what the UK did for France and for Europe during the Second World War, never. And as Ursula von der Leyen has said, the bonds between us are unbreakable, even after Brexit. Together, we found solutions to ensure the respect of the Good Friday Agreement in all its dimensions, thereby protecting the gains of the peace process, which people like David Trimble, John Hume, Seamus Mannon, Martin McInnes, and Jan Pesley worked so hard for. I would like to dedicate this award, if I may, to each and every member of the exceptional teams that I have had the privilege of leading during the last 4.5 years. With their commitment, with their perseverance, their tenacity, we would not be where we are today. I continue to believe that we have to be both patriotic and European, patriote européen, Irish and European, French and European. The two go together, lies these two flags behind me today. Together, we can build a Europe that not only protects, but also inspires. A Europe that Europeans would never dream of leaving behind. A Europe that continues to make us stronger together. Ninyat Göker Lekela. There is no strength without unity. So thank you very much to all of you for this award. Thank you very much for your attention. Görev Milama Agwev.
An idea is only as strong as the people who share it. Throughout its history, the European Union, the ideal of Europeans living and working together in peace and prosperity, has been advanced by remarkable people who gave more than was expected. Founded as the Irish Council of the European Movement in the Shelbourne Hotel in January 1954, the European Movement Ireland is an independent, not-for-profit, membership-based organisation working to develop the connection between Ireland and Europe. Since 1988, when Peter Sutherland was named our inaugural European of the Year, The award, our highest honour, has recognised those who have made outstanding contribution to promoting and enhancing Ireland's place in the EU. The title of European of the Year has been awarded to a distinguished list of Irish individuals with backgrounds in art, business, politics and administration. These include former Taoiseach, members of the Irish Defence Forces, the playwright Brian Friel, former Secretary General of the European Commission Catherine Day, and the late John Hume. Our founders believed in recognising the role of people in shaping a better future for the European Union and Ireland's place within it. Today, we believe that more than ever. Michel Barnier took the time and energy to understand Ireland, our unique position, our history, our relationship with the EU. He has gained the trust and respect of the Irish people. He is our European of the Year.
around Brexit, and there's huge intensity around COVID, before that economic crisis and so on. So we will move on to that. But let's get on to the issue that we've been discussing for a year in relation to the EU, specifically the COVID-19 vaccine strategy. Only 45% of people think that the EU strategy is the right one. Now, I think it's important to bear in mind that this poll was taken around the third week of March. And I know that's only a few weeks ago, but you can say that the EU's vaccine strategy has picked up a pace in terms of the rollout in member states, and also some of the more optimistic news that have come from Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer. Supply things seem to be sort of on the mend. But Catherine, is this a problem for the EU? The fact that citizens believe that it's really messed up here, and one of the most important tests of the century.
I think it is. It's going to be a really key challenge for the European Union. I mean, they launched their vaccine strategy in June, but they've also been in uncharted territory, like every member state as well. This is something that is really, really new. And I think that it's very important to remember that health policy is a nation state competency. It's not at the EU level. So member states have been very worried about handing over those kind of national health powers. And there's also been an issue as well around getting member state buy-in. It's also been hampered a little bit by the EU negotiating effort on contracts and different things. But that is a really big ask when you're also in a challenging circumstance for a member state to do. And cost has also come up as a key issue. So generally speaking, how it's been done is that it's been allocated on a pro rata allocation, with countries getting doses according to their population size, which would have been advantageous for a small member state like Ireland. But I think it's what's been highlighted certainly in mass media is the differences in the vaccine rollout strategy, and that is what is kind of gauging kind of traction. The EU has missed its first target to vaccinate 80% of the over 80s by the start of April. On the 28th of March, that rate was 59.8%, so it's quite a way off. The next target is to vaccinate 70% of the population by the end of July. And as you've said, you know, with kind of more vaccines becoming available, with generally the rollout starting to speed up, I think there is a possibility that the EU might meet that second target. And I think it is going to be something that I think will maybe feed into kind of the Convention on the Future of Europe about, is this a competency that does need to be needs treaty change and essentially then be passed up to the EU level?
But Noelle, there's a lot of layers to the EU vaccine strategy. You know, one of the first contracts they signed was with AstraZeneca, and AstraZeneca has failed to deliver. But instead of AstraZeneca getting a lot of the blame and the criticism, it comes down to the EU, which is not a country, which has been trying to work 27 governments, some of which didn't want to spend money on Pfizer and so on. Much more difficult. But how much of this is communication? Because if you see the fact that people disagree that the EU's done a good job, and when you look at the context of actually getting 27 countries who really withhold confidence when it comes to healthcare, and knowing that actually the vaccine manufacturers have a lot to answer to here. I mean, is the EU doing a really bad job in the communication, or should it, you know, actually be criticised for doing not a great job at this test?
Look, I think it's fair to say, Shona, that nobody would claim that the EU had a somewhat turbulent start to it in its terms of its response to the vaccine strategy. But I know we overuse that word unprecedented, but it truly was unprecedented. There wasn't a manual or a template or a how-to ready to deal with this, and the complexities of the multifaceted nature of the differing national approaches and the EU not having the overarching competency in the treaty frameworks for health policy certainly led to some speed bumps. But to your point on communications, listeners and viewers will be somewhat sick of hearing me say this, but we do have a tendency to nationalize success and Europeanize failure. So we have to look at how national governments are rolling that out. But interesting on the timing, Shona, I think a key thing for this, when we did this fieldwork, as everything in relation to polls, they are but a snapshot of time. It is useful to track over the years. When the fieldwork took place, as you said, it was late March. The positive news on Pfizer hadn't come through. And arguably, as the vaccination rollout would ramp up, I think the view and the sentiment on that might be somewhat different were we to carry out the poll again late summer. But just one thing on vaccine strategy, I was reminded that it takes on average about 10 years to develop a vaccine. What scientists have done in turning around a vaccine to the coronavirus in 10 months is phenomenal. And the EU has, in fairness, provided a huge level of funding, research development support, along with others in that regard. And just to Catherine's point, and I'm very mindful of that she's joining us from Manchester, but I mean, something that I think we in Ireland should always also bear in mind from an Irish perspective in terms of our purchasing power. The entire population of Ireland is less than the populations of the cities of Birmingham and Manchester combined. So certainly from an Irish perspective, in terms of vaccine market access, in terms of price conditions, due to our membership of the EU, with its larger heft, with its greater purchasing power, procurement ability, we certainly in Ireland have benefited from that in terms of that access, were we forced to have gone to market on our own.
Yeah. Catherine, you are in Manchester, obviously. Do you think that the EU would do a better job if it had greater competence for health? Because we're actually, the next thing in our poll, of course, is that only 35% of people now want to give the EU more control in the area of health. But in order for them to do a better job, maybe they need that. But I suppose they haven't really proven to citizens that they should deliver that. And I suppose the fact that you're in the UK, you know how difficult it is to have a serious sort of fair, clear debate about the EU. We know it ourselves, in particular, you know, about referendums too. They never tend to be about the actual issues. And also, when there's a lack of knowledge about the facts, anybody can lie to persuade people in a particular direction. Do you think it's likely people would give in to having the EU having more competence on this area?
I mean, my first initial reaction would be no, because again, I think that it has been such a difficult thing to manage. It has, as Noelle said, has been unprecedented, and the EU hasn't really painted itself in a very positive light. But as Noelle correctly pointed out, for small member states like Ireland, this is something that is really, really crucial, because if Ireland and many other smaller EU member states, if they had to go on the open market and do them themselves, it would be very, very difficult to do so. So in that respect, the EU is actually, you know, being very, very successful, and in a very, very short space of time, did collectively get agreement among 27 EU member states quicker than they would have on a lot of other issues. So there has been successes, but I think it's the kind of comms and communication around that. You know, we don't have a central EU press corps, for example, that doesn't roll that out like a national press can. And that has a real impact.
Understood, Catherine, can I ask you, because, you know, when you hear a lot or even read about, particularly in the British press, about the EU's rollout, it's basically, you know, a failure of the whole EU project. Might as well throw in the towel sort of context, you know. And also, but from an Irish point of view, do you think that there's a realization that Ireland doesn't and wouldn't have the negotiating heft to go out on the open market and get, you know, whatever, 4 million vaccines, 8 million vaccines? Germany, France, the UK would have them first. But is there? Do you think that that's realised?
I think it's, in the terms of the kind of, if you're taking the first point first about the EU perspective in British politics. I mean, the British press has used the EU as the scapegoat for many years. Euroscepticism did not, you know, appear in 2016 or even 2014 in the UK. It has been long-standing, and again, even post-Brexit, it is still being used as the scapegoat for things that haven't worked out quite well. As I said at the very beginning in my point, that the EU's joint procurement scheme is optional. So when people say, oh, well, this in the UK, Brexit has facilitated this fantastic, speedy vaccine rollout in the UK, and blaming the EU for that and the fact that Brexit has facilitated, that is absolutely not the case whatsoever. On the question then of Ireland and whether people in Ireland realise that this is, you know, that there is the advantage of being part of the larger European Union in order to procure vaccines, I think this is where that knowledge deficit comes in to Irish public opinion. Yes, it's pro-integrationist. Yes, it's pro-European and supports, you know, strong support for the European Union. But on very key policy areas, there is a real lack of knowledge, and that is where the work has to be done. We see this on health policy. We have seen it in security and defence previously. And again, you know, we know as well that there.
And we'll do so as part of the new conference on the future of Europe. The Irish people have always been and always will remain pro-European. But it's not a relationship that has always been plain sailing. We've had lots of positives. The enormous solidarity in relation to Brexit. We've been huge beneficiaries, and we still are, of the single market and also structural funds. And we're founder members of the euro, our single currency, which has brought us price stability and low interest rates for decades now. But there have been less positive experiences as well. Certainly the EU, IMF, ECB Troika process and experience strained relations and Irish attitudes towards the European Union. And there have been referendum defeats as well, often linked to concerns about diminution of sovereignty or threats to our military neutrality. And it's also a relationship which is one that's changing and changing profoundly at the moment. First of all, we're now a net contributor, and that will inevitably change the way we look at things. It hasn't yet, but politics and history tells us that it will. There's also a bit of a shift towards protectionism and confidence creep at European level, and that will concern some. And of course, the impact of Brexit is going to be profound and will forever change the web of relationships across these islands and in Europe. As a country and as a society, we're deeply grateful for the solidarity that we received from our EU neighbours, including Germany and Chancellor Merkel in particular, throughout the Brexit negotiating period. And I think it highlighted to us in the best way possible how sharing national sovereignty makes us stronger in our engagement with third countries in the wider world. It also demonstrates that in the European Union, the interests of small countries do matter. Of course, big countries have more influence and more power, but they don't make all the decisions alone. And I think that was a particularly important message from Brexit. The idea of shared sovereignty was one of the big attractions for Ireland in joining the European Union, providing a means for us to break free from our historic dependence on our larger neighbour, the United Kingdom. Joining the European Union, or the EEC as it was at the time, allowed us to be part of something bigger, while remaining an independent state with our own identity. And I think for many in Britain, the experience might have been the reverse. Joining the EEC caused them to pull away from the old empire and the Commonwealth, and to join something that to them perhaps felt smaller and less familiar. But as we all know in practice, despite our enormous differences, Ireland allied itself with the United Kingdom on most of the everyday issues that the European Union dealt with. As a free trade, pro-enterprise and pro-competition champion, we tended to adopt similar positions and similar opt-outs to the UK. The United Kingdom, like Ireland, looks west to America and is Atlanticist in its outlook, as well as to Europe. And I do think that the European Union without the United Kingdom is a different place, and is a weaker and poorer place without Britain as a member. But that is their decision, and we respect it. So Ireland is now actively seeking to build new alliances to fill that gap and to advance our interests. As Taoiseach, on occasion, I was invited to attend the meetings of the Nordic and Baltic Prime Ministers, and we have much in common with those countries, as well as the Benelux countries and places further afield, like Cyprus and Malta. And now as Minister for Trade, I meet with a group of like-minded ministers to discuss how we should position ourselves on major trade issues, and that group includes Germany. We're currently reviewing the EU's trade policy, and I'm always making the case for free trade, a multilateral rules-based order, and the need to link sustainability and social standards to trade. And I am doing all that I can to resist covert protectionism, whether it comes from member states or from the Commission itself. I'm also highlighting the importance of rebuilding the transatlantic relationship, the biggest and most economically significant political and security partnership in the world. And I believe that Ireland can act as a bridge between the EU and America, especially under the Biden administration, given his and his team's close contacts with Ireland. The Atlantic alliance between Europe and America is the keystone of global security and prosperity, and I want it to be restored to good health. But I think the priorities that I've outlined are also priorities for the United Kingdom, and I think it would be foolish for us to see the UK as a competitor and to discount its role as an ally. Prime Minister Johnson outlined his ambition for a global Britain in the integrated review he published last month. And our own Global Ireland programme, which I launched back in 2018, shares much of the same ambition. To quote the political declaration on the future of the EU-UK relationship, the Union and the United Kingdom are determined to work together to safeguard the rules-based international order, the rule of law and promotion of democracy, and high standards of free and fair trade and workers' rights, consumer and environmental protection, and cooperation against internal and external threats to their values and interests. I think that's a very powerful statement, and we have a responsibility to fulfill that joint ambition, to repair our relationships, and to achieve our common interests and values in a rapidly changing world, where economic and political influence is shifting south and east. I always want to approach any discussion about the European Union with a positive attitude, to talk much more about what we can achieve rather than what we want to block or resist. The policy challenges that we face are increasingly global, and they cannot be met by nation states acting alone. Our response to this pandemic is a case in point. So are the other major issues of our time: climate change, migration, international terrorism, and the regulation of major companies. These can only be dealt with as Europe united. Ideally, I'd like us to partner with the UK on as many of these global issues as is possible. But I'm not naive to think that things can carry on just as they used to. But politically, it does make sense to have a common approach on as many of these issues as possible. Ireland and the United Kingdom share a common geography, culture and values. The UK is our closest neighbour, where many of our friends and family live, and where many of us will go to work and study. The United Kingdom is not a foreign country. Yes, the relationship is strained, but it can be repaired. The Good Friday Agreement, signed 23 years ago last weekend, had the foresight to provide in it mechanisms to strengthen the relationship between our islands. It's not just about cross-community power sharing in Northern Ireland, Strand 1. Under Strand 2, the North-South Ministerial Council and the North-South bodies ensure closer cooperation and joint action between North and South. Under Strand 3, the British-Irish Council covers matters of mutual interest, bringing together representatives from 8 jurisdictions, including Guernsey, the Isle of Man and Jersey. And the BIIGC provides a formal structure for enhanced relations between the two sovereign governments. At the moment, we're exploring each other's ideas as to how we can enhance the UK-Irish dialogue, looking at models, for example, like the Nordic Council, a model which Taoiseach has spoken about. Whatever form it takes, we're agreed that there needs to be more engagement between the UK and Irish governments, and we hope that the British government feels the same way. We appreciate that while we see Britain as our larger and nearest neighbour and our biggest market, that isn't true in reverse. This engagement that used to happen between British and Irish ministers would happen as a matter of course at the fringes of EU Council meetings in Brussels and Luxembourg, and in the daily interactions of officials on the corridors of the EU institutions. So there's a big gap there. Not just because of the pandemic, we're not seeing each other or talking or interacting as much as we used to before. And I think we need to correct that. Brexit as a policy was always going to be disruptive, and it was always going to have a disproportionate impact on the island of Ireland. But what we've seen on the streets of Northern Ireland in recent weeks really does concern us all. What politicians say matters, so I'll keep my words brief and to the point and careful. I want to say that we understand the genuinely held concerns of the people of the Protestant, Unionist and Loyalist community who fear divergence from the rest of the UK. For our part, we never wanted any trade barriers between North and South, between Northern Ireland and Great Britain, or between Great Britain and the Republic of Ireland. That's why we were against Brexit. It's why we advocated the United Kingdom staying in the single market and or the customs union. It's why, when that was not possible, we negotiated a single customs territory or the backstop. And it was the rejection of all of these potential solutions that gave rise to the protocol. And now we just want to make it work. And so the Irish government will continue to advocate for flexibility, for common sense, and for generosity in terms of solutions from London, from Dublin, and from Brussels. Any disruption to trade, human movement, or animal movement between Northern Ireland and Great Britain should be minimised. But we cannot support anything that would undermine the integrity of the single market or Ireland's place in it. And of course, no change can be made to an EU-UK treaty unilaterally. It can only be made by agreement in Brussels and London, and ideally in Dublin and Belfast too. So unilateral action isn't going to work, and that's why we need agreed solutions. And I believe the way forward is through dialogue, through normal democratic politics, through the institutions of the Good Friday Agreement, the EU-UK Joint Committee, and specialised committees under the agreed framework. The protocol was hard won. It is carefully constructed, and it is designed to ensure that the disruption for Northern Ireland is the least it could be, while preserving the delicate balance that the Good Friday Agreement established. It provides Northern Ireland companies with unfettered access to both the EU single market and the UK internal market. And as Minister for Enterprise, Trade and Employment, I'd really like to see politicians and stakeholders in Northern Ireland exploiting this unique advantage that they now have. For our part, the Irish government doesn't want to see any disruption to the Northern Ireland economy, to daily life north of the border, or to the flow of goods between it and Great Britain. But we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that the protocol isn't just about trade. It's also about protecting the rights of citizens in Northern Ireland. And it is up to the Northern Ireland Assembly to decide whether it wants to disapply the protocol. And no majority of any form at present exists for that. The majority of parties and politicians in Northern Ireland want to make the protocol work too. And I don't think that the next Assembly elections are likely to change that reality. But of course, that remains to be seen. Before I finish up, I just want to thank the European Movement and CAS for organising this series. I think it's timely that as we begin a new chapter for Europe and consider our collective future as part of the Conference on the Future of Europe, Ireland favours a policy-focused, citizen-first approach to the conference. And in a time like this, our citizens want us to respond to the issues that they care about most, rather than focus on institutional issues and mechanisms. While we do not seek treaty change, we do, of course, not rule it out. And we're currently preparing a programme of inclusive events which will ensure a broad representative range of perspectives are canvassed. And like today's event, we want to facilitate as much discussion and as much interaction as possible. So less of me and more of you, and thanks again for the opportunity to speak, and I look forward to your comments and questions later on.
So, Gurv Mila Mahagwif Galera was fine Intuk Sauce the Ben so Livsha Anuk is which a Clora law either not shoot the Naman no shockton, either not shoot the Naman August shockton the Gaelga no Haikish na Gaelga fresh. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I want to just say a very big thank you to the European movement for this opportunity to speak to you and to talk with Gillian, which is always my immense pleasure, and to set out some of my thoughts at this particular juncture and at this time of our political year. I think it's very important that women celebrate our progress and that we acknowledge our struggles, that we share our ideas, express our perspectives, and that we debate differing points of view, because honest conversation is the best way to shape the way forward. And our goal should remain clear: equality for women, all women. This remains an intrinsic value of the European family. It's fair to say that significant progress has been made here in Ireland. We need look no further than the repeal of the 8th Amendment to gauge just how far we've come. However, there is still a road to be travelled before women are truly treated as equal. So our job is to create change in our time, to be inspired by the fortitude of women who came before us, and then to walk our length of the journey with determination and with positivity. We have, I believe, a responsibility to continue the fight for equality, not only for ourselves, but for our daughters, for our granddaughters, for the women and girls who may be strangers to us, but who face the same discrimination and everyday sexism when they step outside their door in the morning. Because these things haven't gone away in modern Ireland, and they remain hugely damaging. So our goal has to be to create a society where we can tell every little girl that they can be whoever they want to be. A society where the only barriers to achieving their aspirations are the limits that they place on themselves. It's important to have a language of equality, but words and sentiment, while powerful and necessary, will only go so far if they're not backed up by meaningful action. After all, equality and the denial of equality is, first and foremost, a choice made by those in power and those with the loudest voices in decision-making. And historically in Ireland, those voices have not been the voices of women. And women have paid a heavy price for this. In order to make progress, we have to be honest about the past. We live in a country where the mistreatment of women and girls was hardwired into how our state was run. State and church together made a decision that women were to be subservient and obedient, and keeping women in their place was a foundation stone of the state. Anything outside of the boundaries of their narrow morality was met with shaming, ostracization, and brutality. And the horror of mother and baby homes, the Magdalene laundries, the illegal adoption scandals comprise the legacy of an oppression that we are only now emerging from. So I think our past should make us more resolute in confronting the state on the injustices women face today. The fates of women like Emma Vic-Fahuna, Irene Teep, Joan Lucy, the way in which women affected by the cervical check scandal are still dragged through the courts tell us that even today the lives of women are not the priority for the state. The injustice, the heartbreak and loss of Anne Lovett, of Bridget McCole, of Savita Halapanavar are lessons that we should never take for granted and we should never repeat. I think they illuminate the scale of the challenge that lies ahead of us, because the inequality of today is inextricably linked to the inequality of yesterday. The high walls and the wrought iron gates have been replaced by the feminization of poverty. Those in power make bad decisions that disproportionately affect women. And today, many women are kept in their place by making them poor and keeping them poor. And the state used to institutionalize its single mothers, well, now it impoverishes them. And we see this most dramatically in the treatment of lone parent families. We see it too in the lack of progress in legal protections and services for the victims of domestic violence, despite the fact that crime against women is at epidemic proportions. And only this week it was reported the number of homeless women has doubled since 2015. So there is no point in walking the long road of progress if we're not going to bring all women, every woman, with us. We have a collective responsibility to ensure that equality is for all. Particularly those of us who are in leadership positions must dispense that responsibility. And not just those of us in politics, but women in leadership at all levels and in all corners of our society. We need to be honest. We need to recognise where women are still left behind. We know that crises can be used as an excuse to push a regressive agenda even harder. I believe during the last crash, the austerity era was defined by a raft of cuts that directly affected women in particular. And today, studies show that COVID-19, this pandemic, has had a disproportionate impact on women. We face greater job losses, a greater decline in work-life balance, and women's share of unpaid work has increased dramatically in trying to juggle work and homeschooling. The failure of successive governments to address the childcare issue and the failure repeated during lockdown once again in this regard reflects a lack of urgency when it comes to resolving those problems that disproportionately affect us as women. And if women are ever going to fulfill our full potential in the workplace and in society, well, then we need a state-delivered childcare system. This pandemic has the potential to roll back years of progress. I hope that doesn't happen. I believe we can't allow that to happen. And I know that only women acting together and for one another can stop it. As I've said, equality is a decision, and we simply don't have enough women yet in the room. I say this as the first female leader of the opposition, and with the ambition of perhaps becoming our first female Taoiseach. The Dáil of 2021 remains a boys' club. Less than a quarter of TDs are women. Just one additional woman was elected to the Dáil last February. 40% of cabinet committees have no women at all. It's almost like the 1950s. We need more women in the room where decisions are taken. And this calls not alone for implementing quotas, but also for modernising how the Oireachtas works to make itself more family-friendly and more woman-friendly. If things are going to change, then the message needs to go out loud and clear that a woman's place is in Leinster House, and the actions required must follow that message. We also, I believe, need more feminists in the room. I'm proud to be a feminist. Feminism is about equality for women, but it's also about an equal world. Feminism is not just about women and girls, it's also about boys and men, and it's good for society. This is an international struggle for equality, one that is best advanced by a social, progressive Europe working together for full equality. The achievement of the Irish Protocol in the Brexit negotiations demonstrates just what can be achieved against the odds through real partnership. Recent attempts to undermine that protocol are dangerous, and it's very welcome that there has almost been universal condemnation of those efforts. I believe that the contribution of Europe will be crucial as we continue our conversation on Irish unity and the journey towards a referendum, not least because it raises the prospect of the EU welcoming a reunified Ireland as a full member state. So the future is there to be won, and the European family can win and win big by choosing equality. That is why Europe must champion tackling the gender pay gap, shattering the glass ceiling. This is an important length of the road for this generation, our generation of women to walk. Of course, change always starts at home. Women will only have equality on this island when those we elect choose the politics of equality, the policies of equality, the budgets of equality, and choose to legislate for equality. They must make these decisions not once in a while, not simply to mark International Women's Day, but every single day. This has been a difficult year for everyone. The pandemic has turned our world upside down. But maybe through the chaos, we have a chance to build something new, something different. Maybe this is an opportunity to rebuild our world as one where women and girls are no longer told this far and no further. That's the world that I want from my daughter. Those who really want equality will choose it. Those who don't, won't. My message to those in power here at home, in Europe and throughout the world is choose equality. The women of the world are watching. We are not fed up. We are fired up. We are ready to go, and we will not be denied our future. Guramahagut.
Good morning, Noel. Good morning, Morris. And I'm delighted to be with you all here today. As you all know, the International European Movement Network, of which you are a part, was established over 7 decades ago. And you, along with your sister organisations, have spent so many years communicating and inspiring citizens to learn about and to engage with our European community, which is, of course, our Union of Nations. This work remains as important now as it was when you began your work in 1953, when Ireland was looking at the nascent European coal and steel community. A very different Ireland, and indeed a very different Europe. While no one could have seen then the enormous social, political, and economic changes that have transformed our world in the time since, I think it would have been equally as unforeseen to your members in 1953 how transformative membership of the European project would be for our country. We are part of what the economist Martin Sandbu refers to as the deepest voluntary project of globalization the world has ever seen. And this has not only been transformative for us as a nation, it has been so for us as citizens, for our feeling, I think, of what it is to be Irish. Like many others, I see my Irish and my European citizenship as closely interconnected, mutually beneficial aspects of my own sense of my nationality. And as such, it's a great personal honour for me to hold the European post of President of the Eurogroup, as well as that, of course, of Minister for Finance of our country. And I want to reflect on how my experiences as an Irish Minister for Finance and as an Irish and European citizen helped me in my work as President of the Eurogroup. To do this, I am so conscious that we're all fatigued and all worn out by endless webinars. So I'm going to briefly set out my role as President of the Eurogroup, the objectives of the Eurogroup, what they mean for Europe and Ireland, and then reflect on some of my learnings in that work and how this can be applied to our work in Europe. After that, I really look forward to all your questions and answers. So to begin, I was elected President of the Eurogroup last July for a 2.5-year term. As many of you will know, the Eurogroup is an informal body of finance ministers inside the Euro area. Our main goal is to achieve consensus on economic policy through a focus on political discussion. It's somewhat different to ECOFIN's more legislative role, and the latter, ECOFIN, is also explicitly an EU 27 body. The Eurogroup is a political body with political processes and political objectives. As President, I engage very regularly with the institutions of our Union. This includes the ECB, the Commission, the ESM, and the Council. We also have regular so-called interinstitutional actor meetings, or in more colloquial terms, a four presidents call, which involves presidents of the Council, the Commission, the Central Bank, and myself. These discussions feed into the work we do within Eurogroup. Another important part of my work is to represent the Eurogroup at the European Council, where I presented to our leaders only last week on the international role of the euro. I also represent the Eurogroup at G7 meetings, which are currently chaired by the United Kingdom, with a particular focus at the moment on the common challenges created by COVID and the global economic response. We're also fortunate in that we can expand the Eurogroup into a more inclusive format, depending on the topic at hand. This can involve opening up our discussions to include non-Euro area countries, but also by inviting external speakers in to participate on particular topics. This has included representatives from the World Health Organization and the European Centre for Disease Control to get their views on COVID-19, but also briefing some other experts depending on the topic. So that's what the Eurogroup is. Onto our work plan. We have, as you'd expect, a very detailed work plan with 5 broad priorities. First, the pursuit of economic and fiscal policies to support recovery and long-term growth. Second, the use of banking union as a source of stability and a source of growth. Third, a focus on the euro area dimensions of capital markets union. Fourth, the future of the euro as a digital currency. and then finally, the international role of the euro. I won't discuss all of these today, as I want to focus primarily on the first item, economic and fiscal policies that support recovery, as I think it illustrates some of the more important lessons in how we seek to influence and participate in European economic policy making. In more normal times, the aim of the Eurogroup is to ensure the close coordination of economic policies across member states so as to promote stronger and more resilient growth. Obviously, our primary focus now is on economic recovery and coordinating our actions to drive an inclusive and strong recovery as opposed to just a temporary rebound. The distinction between recovery and rebound is a particular priority, and it's reflected in our work to date. To be clear, as the vaccination process gathers momentum and restrictions ease, we will see an automatic upturn in activity. We saw elements of this last summer in Ireland and in the euro area with very strong figures in the third quarter. In the coming months, we will see a resurgence in domestic demand as restrictions gradually ease, and we can already see an elevated level of household savings. However, we need to ensure that the upturn is long-lasting, that it's sustainable. This is at the heart of our income and business support measures, both in Ireland and in the euro area. The relevance and value of this strategy is vital in uncertain times, and it's so helpful for us at Eurogroup to have clarity that every member state at the table has adopted a supportive budgetary stance that feeds into a recovery in the real economy. It's vital for business owners and employers, as they're more likely to keep people in employment and to invest in their business if they know that not only their country, but also all the other countries in our currency union have a supportive budgetary stance. The reality is that the economic confidence effects this creates are greater than the sum of each country's supportive fiscal stance. The European response to this crisis economically has been extraordinary in terms of its size, speed, and coordination. Just to highlight a few points. We built up the necessary level of political momentum to set up the Recovery and Resilience Facility. Eurogroup was also supportive of the General Escape Clause for the first time since last March. This sent out a clear and very early signal to markets and citizens that this crisis and our response to it would be different. 3 critical key safety nets were also quickly agreed at Eurogroup as a direct response to counter COVID-19, to the value of €540 billion. The SURE programme, the European Stability Mechanisms, Pandemic Crisis Support, and the EIB's Pan-European Guarantee Fund. These are all now fully operational. In real terms, the SURE programme has supported furlough schemes in 18 EU countries, benefiting 21.5 million employees and 5 million self-employed, or a quarter of total employment across the recipient EU countries. These are not abstract big numbers. These are real people, real workers, and real businesses, the lifeblood of our economies and of our societies. And the SURE and indeed other government schemes are protecting these incomes, preventing long-term economic scarring, and laying the first foundations for a sustainable recovery. More broadly, the centerpiece of the EU response to date has been the Next Generation EU and Recovery and Resilience Facility. While just over a year ago, this crisis would have been unimaginable, I think this element of the European response to the crisis would have been equally unimaginable. Of course, national governments have also played a pivotal role, as has our European Central Bank. There's no question that budgetary and monetary policy have worked hand in hand. From the outset, the ECB have been decisive in their monetary policy actions, notably through the Pandemic Emergency Purchase Programme. Its decisions have been vital in keeping yields low and in providing liquidity. This has helped instill an air of confidence and certainty at a time marked by uncertainty. This has allowed national governments to step up and take unprecedented steps to protect income, lives and livelihoods. And while estimates vary, last year close to 8% of GDP was spent supporting our euro area economies, with an additional 19% of GDP in various types of liquidity support. All of these decisions have helped supports flow in an efficient and an effective manner. Reflecting back on what has been done, speed, breadth and depth of economic decision-making stands out. In recent weeks, and as I've mentioned earlier, we have seen a number of comparisons on the respective sizes of the EU and US responses. These debates are, of course, important, but we need to make sure we don't miss a critical point. We should make sure we don't deflect from the value of what these and all countries are doing. Aside from obvious differences between the US and the EU countries, there are inherent differences in our economies, our social protection systems, and in our longer term objectives. Ultimately, what both we in Europe and our colleagues and partners in America are doing are injecting huge amounts of resources into battling this disease. These stimuli will mutually reinforce one another. I want to give you a particular point and insight into how our Eurogroup practically impacts on the budgetary policy of the 19 euro area member states based on our meeting of a couple of weeks ago. At Eurogroup, we've regular discussions, as you'd expect, on economic policy. Usually these debates occur at particular points in the year. However, last month, we issued a very strong statement on which there was unanimity. This was driven by a consensus that we needed to reaffirm not only our budgetary policy coordination, but also the messaging with regards to it, not just for this year, but also for next year, so that member states could prepare budgets that continue the vital economic supports to citizens and businesses. There are a number of different elements to it, but the key takeaway was the absolute consensus on the need for supportive economic policies right across the euro area. In simple terms, we reaffirmed that there'll be no premature withdrawal of budgetary support. The Eurogroup will also issue further guidance.
We hope you enjoyed today's event and we look forward to working with you in the weeks and months ahead to address the common challenges our continent faces, but also to craft a way forward for the European Union, one that is based on the principles of democracy, peace, solidarity, and equality. Thank you very much for joining. See you very soon.